Before we drift away, don't forget to like the video and subscribe for more calming sleep stories. Sweet dreams await. The wind howled through the dense forest as the storm closed in. Thick clouds hung low in the sky, casting an eerie gray light over Briarwood Lodge. A deep sense of foreboding clung to the trees like a thick fog, their twisted branches reaching out as though trying to touch the very heavens themselves. The distant rumble of thunder echoed like a warning, and the first drops of rain began to tap softly against the roof of the lodge. Inside, the crackling sound of a campfire broke the stillness, its warm glow flickering in the large stone hearth. The flames danced and twisted, casting long shadows on the wooden walls. A group of strangers had gathered in the lodge, drawn here by the promise of a quiet weekend retreat in the heart of the forest. The fire was the only light in the room, and outside, the storm continued to grow fiercer by the minute. Sitting close to the fire were Emma, a young writer searching for inspiration, and her older brother, Jake, who had insisted on joining her despite her protests. They were joined by two other guests, a couple who had arrived earlier in the day. The couple, Mark and Sarah, were seasoned hikers who seemed at ease with the wilderness, their laughter ringing out as they shared stories of past adventures. But there was something about this place. The silence of the forest was too profound, as if the trees themselves were holding their breath, waiting. Emma couldn't shake the feeling that they weren't alone, though she couldn't quite put her finger on why. A sudden gust of wind rattled the windows, causing everyone to jump. The fire popped, sending a few embers spiraling up the chimney. Mark stood up with a smirk. "Not much for comfort, is it?" he joked. "I swear I thought I heard footsteps out there." The others laughed nervously, but Emma felt a shiver creep up her spine. The storm outside wasn't the only thing that was getting worse. The wind grew louder, and the rain began to pour, hammering against the roof. The fire crackled and spat as if something was disturbing the air around them. Emma leaned in closer to the fire, her eyes darting to the large windows that framed the dark woods outside. For a brief moment, she thought she saw movement in the trees, but when she blinked, it was gone. "It's nothing," she muttered to herself, trying to push the thought away. Jake caught her glance and gave her a reassuring smile. "You okay?" he asked softly. Emma nodded, but her unease lingered. The storm wasn't the only thing that was intensifying. There was something else, something hidden in the dark corners of the forest, and whatever it was getting closer. The storm outside raged on, the wind howling like a wild animal searching for its prey, its howl rising and falling in rhythm with the crashing waves of thunder that shook the very foundations of Briarwood Lodge. Inside, the fire flickered, casting strange and warped shadows against the walls, making the room feel even smaller, as if the forest outside had crept in, filling every corner with its dark, oppressive presence. Emma sat on the edge of her seat, the warmth of the fire doing little to calm the growing unease in her chest. Her brother Jake had gone to fetch another log for the fire, leaving her alone with the couple, Mark and Sarah, who were deep in conversation. The two of them had been talking about their recent hiking trip up north, swapping stories about wildlife sightings and near misses with dangerous trails, but Emma could barely focus. Every few seconds, her eyes drifted back to the windows, where the relentless downpour blurred the world outside into a shifting sea of black and gray. The trees seemed to loom closer with every gust of wind, their branches swaying like skeletal arms reaching out toward the lodge. She thought she saw something move in the shadows between them, but when she looked harder, there was nothing. She shook her head, trying to dismiss the thought as just her imagination playing tricks. Yet, a cold shiver crawled up her spine. It wasn't the storm that was making her feel uneasy, it was something else, something deeper, like the forest itself was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. Sarah, sitting across from her, noticed Emma's distracted look. "You all right?" she asked, her voice soft but tinged with a hint of concern. Emma blinked, snapping out of her trance. "Yeah, I'm fine. It's hard to ignore the storm," she said, forcing a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Mark chuckled, though his laugh sounded hollow in the thick atmosphere. "Don't worry. We've stayed here plenty of times before. The storm is just part of the experience." His tone was light, but Emma could tell there was something unspoken between them. They didn't seem as comfortable as they wanted to let on. Emma's gaze shifted back to the dark windows, the rain pouring harder now, each drop sounding like a drumbeat against the glass. It was then she noticed something strange. Amidst the crackling sound of the fire and the distant roar of the storm, there was something else. A faint, almost imperceptible whisper coming from beyond the walls. It was so soft at first she thought it was just the wind, but then it grew louder, distinct words weaving through the sound of the rain. "Not safe, not safe, leave." Her heart skipped a beat. She leaned forward, her eyes wide with unease, but the whisper was gone, swallowed by the wind. She turned to Mark and Sarah, but they were too absorbed in their conversation to notice. The words, or whatever they were, still lingered in the air, like a presence pressing against the lodge's thick walls. Emma's mind raced. Was she hearing things? Was it the stress of the storm, the isolation of the forest, or was there someone out there? Her breath quickened, and her eyes darted around the room, landing on the dark hallway that led to the back of the lodge. It was pitch black down there, the only light coming from the fire's dim glow. A shadow moved at the end of the hallway, and Emma's heart jumped. She blinked and looked again, but there was nothing. Maybe we should check the windows, Emma suggested, her voice coming out shakier than she intended. The wind's getting pretty bad. Could be more damage to the roof. Sarah looked at her, the concern in her eyes shifting to something more knowing, as if she too could sense the same unease. You know what? That's probably a good idea, she agreed, standing up. I'll go with you. The two women made their way toward the windows, the fire crackling behind them as the wind howled louder. As Emma reached the nearest window, she drew the heavy curtains aside, revealing a scene that sent a chill deep into her bones. The rain hammered down in sheets, but it was what she saw outside that made her heart freeze in place. Between the trees, barely visible through the thick rain and darkness, were shapes, human figures, standing motionless, their faces hidden by hoods or dark clothing, blending with the shadows. They were too still, too quiet, and they were watching the lodge, their gaze fixed on the windows where Emma and Sarah stood. Emma stepped back from the window, her pulse racing. She could hardly breathe, her mind struggling to process what she had just seen. Sarah, there's something out there, she whispered, her voice trembling. People, or something. Sarah turned, her expression one of disbelief, but when she reached the window, her face went pale. She didn't speak for a moment, her eyes scanning the dark trees. I don't see anything, she said slowly, almost cautiously. I swear I saw them, Emma insisted, her voice growing more frantic. They were standing there watching us. Mark had risen from his seat, drawn by the tension in Emma's voice. What's going on? He asked, his brow furrowed. There's something outside, Emma said, her voice barely above a whisper, as though speaking too loudly would draw the figures closer. Jake returned then, carrying a heavy log for the fire, but his cheerful demeanor faltered when he saw the tense atmosphere in the room. What's all this about? Before anyone could answer, a loud knock echoed from the front door, sharp and sudden, breaking the uneasy silence. The sound reverberated through the lodge, followed by a second knock and then a third. Each knock seemed to carry more weight, a pressure building in the air, as though the storm outside had reached its peak. Sarah's eyes widened. Who would be knocking at this hour? She asked, her voice low and uncertain. The knock came again, louder this time, and then a voice, a low, gravelly whisper, carried through the door. Let us in. Everyone froze. The fire crackled, the wind howled, and outside the figures in the trees remained still, waiting. The knock came again, a sharp, unmistakable rattle against the old wooden door. It sent a ripple of fear through the room, as if the very walls of Briarwood Lodge were trembling in response to whatever awaited outside. For a long moment no one moved. The air seemed to thicken, hanging heavy with the unspoken tension. The fire's warm glow flickered weakly, casting long, twisted shadows that seemed to stretch unnaturally along the walls. Emma's breath caught in her throat as she stared at the door. There was something unsettling about the silence that followed the last knock. No footsteps, no rustling, nothing but the eerie hum of the storm outside. The figures in the trees were still, their presence lingering in the periphery of her mind. But now her attention was fixed entirely on the door. Whoever, or whatever, was out there had heard them, had sensed them through the walls of the lodge. Who would be knocking at this hour? Sarah's voice cracked, her usual calm demeanor now replaced with a tremor of uncertainty. Jake was the first to move, stepping cautiously toward the door. We're not expecting anyone, he said, his voice steady but with a hint of unease. He reached for the handle, but before his fingers made contact, the voice came again, this time more clearly, rising above the howl of the storm. Let us in. The words were soft, almost mournful, but there was an underlying menace to them, as if the speaker was trying to mask something darker beneath the surface. It was a voice that sent a cold shiver crawling down Emma's spine. She couldn't place it. It was a deep, gravelly voice, distorted in a way that made it sound as if it was coming from a great distance. Farther than the front porch, farther than the trees outside. No, Jake said, his hand pausing just an inch from the door handle. He glanced back over his shoulder at the others, his expression darkening. Something's not right. No one should be out there. Sarah nodded, her eyes wide with growing alarm. We need to call the police. Or the rangers. This is not normal. But Emma, still standing by the window, couldn't tear her gaze away from the trees outside. The figures were gone. She had been certain of what she saw, their dark forms standing there, unmoving, waiting. Now the woods were empty, the rain slanting down in thick sheets, hiding whatever may have been lurking there. It was as if the storm itself had swallowed them up, erased them from view in the blink of an eye. Another knock came, this time louder, followed by a heavy thud against the door. The impact shook the walls, rattling the furniture and sending a sharp echo throughout the lodge. This time the voice wasn't muffled, it was clear, demanding. Open the door. Jake turned away from the door, his face pale. I don't care who you are. You're not coming in. His voice was firm, but there was a quiver beneath his words, as though he wasn't entirely convinced himself. Emma could feel her heart pounding in her chest. The whole place felt wrong. The air was too thick, too heavy with tension. The storm was no longer just a backdrop to the scene. It had become part of the lodge, the wind pressing against the walls, the rain hammering down like a warning. She glanced at the others. Mark and Sarah were huddled together, their faces tight with fear, their eyes darting between the door and the windows, as if expecting something to break through at any moment. And then there was the darkness. It had crept in silently, filling every corner of the lodge, despite the fire's flickering light. It felt suffocating, pressing in from all sides, curling into the shadows like something alive. Emma could hear the whispers again, faint but distinct, swirling around her mind. Not safe, leave. She turned away from the window, her pulse quickening. The whispers were coming from inside now, or was it just her imagination? She couldn't tell. Everything was starting to blend together, the storm, the voices, the shadows. She needed to focus. She needed to stay calm. We need to do something, she whispered, more to herself than anyone else. Get away from the door, Jake suddenly snapped, his voice filled with urgency. He grabbed Emma by the arm, pulling her back from the threshold. Get away from the door now. Emma's mind raced. Why was he so afraid? Why was everyone so tense? The room seemed to close in on her, the walls shifting like they were alive, like they were moving closer with each breath. She looked back at the door, half expecting it to burst open, to reveal whatever lurked on the other side. But no, there was nothing but the pounding rain and the howl of the wind. Mark stepped forward, trying to steady his breath. We can't just sit here, he said, his voice low. We need to see who it is. We can't hide forever. Sarah shook her head, her face pale with fear. No one knocks like that unless they want something. They're not here to help us. Jake turned to face Mark, his eyes hard with resolve. I'm not opening the door. Not until we know what's going on out there. Just as he spoke, the door rattled again. This time the handle twisted. The sound was unmistakable. Someone, or something, on the other side was trying to get in. Everyone froze. Emma could feel the heat of the fire on her back, the air thick with tension. The door groaned under the pressure. The handle rattled again, but this time there was something else. A soft, wet scraping sound as if something was dragging along the wood. Something long like a branch or a claw. Sarah's eyes widened, and she instinctively stepped backward, her breath quickening. What the hell is that? She whispered, her voice barely audible over the sound of the storm. Another scrape, louder this time, followed by a deep, guttural growl, low and slow, like the rumble of distant thunder, but far more menacing. The growl vibrated through the door, through the walls, through Emma's bones. She could feel it in her chest, in her throat. It wasn't a human sound. It was something ancient, something primal. Emma's heart pounded in her ears. There was no escaping it now. Whatever was outside, it wasn't going away. And the longer they waited, the closer it came. The growl reverberated through the lodge, a low, rumbling sound that sent a jolt of terror through everyone in the room. It was as if the very walls themselves were alive, pulsating with the creature's presence. Emma's breath came in short, frantic gasps as her eyes flicked from the door to the windows, and then to the dark hallway that led deeper into the lodge. The shadows there seemed to move, to twist unnaturally, as though something was waiting in the darkness. Jake's grip on her arm tightened, his fingers digging into her flesh, but she didn't mind. She barely noticed anything beyond the growing pressure in the air, the sense that something ancient and hungry was lurking just beyond the threshold. The rain hammered down louder, the wind howling like an animal in pain, but all of it faded into the background. The only sound that mattered now was the growl, the scraping, the thud of something heavy pressing against the door. Sarah took a step backward, her eyes wide with terror. "What the hell is that?" she whispered again, her voice shaking. She clutched Mark's arm, but even he seemed to be struggling with the grip of fear that had taken hold of them all. His face was pale, his usually confident demeanor replaced with a kind of helplessness Emma had never seen before. "I don't know," Mark said, his voice strained. He looked at Jake, his expression hardening. "We need to do something. We can't just stay here." Jake's eyes flicked toward the door, then to the back of the room, where the hallway seemed to stretch endlessly into the darkness. "We need to barricade the door," he said firmly, his voice shaky but resolute. "No one goes near it. Whatever's out there, it's not coming in." The scraping noise came again, louder this time, followed by another guttural growl that sent a shiver down Emma's spine. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and something else, something metallic and sharp like blood. The creature, or whatever it was closer than she had ever imagined something could be. Mark nodded, moving swiftly to the nearest cabinet and pulling out anything heavy he could find. Chairs, a small table, anything to shove against the door. Jake joined him, his hands shaking as he helped him push a wardrobe in front of the door. But it wasn't enough. The growl rumbled again, this time accompanied by a thud, something huge slamming against the wood, causing the entire lodge to shake. The fire sputtered in the hearth, sending a shower of sparks into the air. The wind screamed outside, tearing at the trees with a fury that seemed unnatural. Emma felt like the storm was alive, feeding off the same energy as whatever was at their doorstep. The ground beneath her feet felt unstable, as if the very earth itself was being pulled apart by something monstrous. She turned toward the windows again, her heart hammering in her chest. There, just beyond the glass, she saw them, the figures. But this time they weren't still. They moved, slowly, deliberately, shifting through the rain-soaked trees, their silhouettes barely visible through the downpour. She couldn't see their faces, couldn't make out their features, but she knew they were there, waiting, watching. The whispers returned, growing louder now, swirling around her mind like 1,000 voices. Not safe, leave, it comes. Who's out there?" Emma choked out, the words barely escaping her lips. Mark turned sharply at her question, his face pale as he looked between the windows and the door. "We can't let them in. Whatever it is, whatever's out there, we don't know who they are." "I saw them," Emma whispered, her voice cracking. "They were out there earlier, in the trees. They were watching us. I swear it." Sarah's hand flew to her mouth in shock. "What do you mean you saw them? Are you sure?" "Yes," Emma said, her voice firm despite the panic swelling inside her. "I saw them. Figures standing just outside the trees. They were waiting for something. Watching the lodge." Her words tumbled out, rushed and desperate. "And now they're gone, but the storm, it's different. It's like they're calling something. And that growl, whatever that is, it's not from a person. It's something else. Something dangerous." There was a long pause, the only sound the constant pounding of rain against the windows, the whistling of the wind as it twisted through the trees. And then the growl came again, louder this time, closer. The walls trembled under the force of it, and Emma stumbled backward, her breath catching in her throat. It was impossible to ignore now. The creature was right outside. It was waiting. "We need to find a way out," Jake said, his voice urgent but controlled. "Now." "There's no way out," Mark replied, shaking his head. "We're trapped. The storm's blocking any way down the mountain, and we're stuck here. We can't outrun whatever this is." The words hit Emma like a punch to the gut. Trapped. The thought twisted in her stomach, turning her insides cold. They were completely isolated. Completely alone. The scraping at the door continued, punctuated by the occasional growl, as though the creature outside were toying with them, enjoying their fear. The growl was joined by a new sound, a low, creaking noise like something heavy shifting just outside the threshold. The door groaned in protest under the pressure, the wood splintering slightly with each impact. "We need to move," Sarah said suddenly, her voice tinged with panic. She grabbed Emma's arm and pulled her toward the hallway. "We need to find somewhere to hide. A closet, anything." But Emma didn't move. She couldn't. Her gaze was fixed on the door, on the space beyond it, where the dark figures still loomed, unseen but felt. The whispers had returned, louder now, wrapping around her mind like a vice. Not safe, leave. "Emma?" Jake's voice broke through the fog of fear clouding her mind. He grabbed her by the shoulders and turned her to face him, his eyes wide with concern. "We can't stay here. We need to get out of here now. Whatever it is, it's almost inside." Emma nodded, though the words barely made sense in her mind. Everything was closing in, Everything was wrong in a way she couldn't comprehend. The forest, the storm, the voices, it was all too much. And then, suddenly, there was a sound from the hallway. A faint, creaking step. A soft shuffle of something moving. They weren't alone in the lodge anymore. The hairs on Emma's neck stood on end as the shadows in the hallway began to shift. Something, or someone, was coming. The sound in the hallway was unmistakable. The faint creak of a footstep, then another. Slow. Deliberate. It was a sound that shouldn't have existed in this place. A sound that shouldn't have been there, not in a lodge that had once been full of warmth and comfort. Now, it was just the oppressive weight of silence, broken only by the wind and the strange noises coming from the dark. The storm raged outside, but within the lodge, a stillness had descended that was even more unnerving. Emma's heart raced as she stared into the hallway. The shadows there seemed to twist, to bend in unnatural ways, stretching and shifting like something was moving beneath them. For a moment, she thought she saw a flicker of movement in the darkness. Something tall, something impossibly thin. Then it was gone. But she had seen it, hadn't she? The tall figure, a silhouette against the deeper shadows of the hallway. Her mind screamed for her to move, to turn away, but her feet were frozen in place, as if the lodge itself had a hold on her, keeping her rooted to the spot. Emma? Jake's voice was low, barely above a whisper, but it cut through her fog of fear. She tore her gaze away from the hallway and turned to him. He looked just as terrified as she felt, his eyes wide and frantic, his hands trembling as they rested at his sides. "Did you hear that?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. Jake nodded grimly. "I did." The wind howled again, rattling the windows like the lodge was about to be torn from its foundations. The storm outside seemed to press harder against the walls, as if the forest itself had come alive, trying to break in. The fire crackled, its flames dancing wildly in the hearth, casting flickering shadows that seemed to mock the growing sense of dread in the room. But it was the hallway, the darkness in the hallway, that drew Emma's gaze once more. Something was there. She could feel it, a presence lurking just beyond the edge of the firelight. It wasn't the same as the figures in the trees outside, or the sound of the growls. No, this was something else. Something older. Something more ancient. The footsteps continued, slow and steady. There was no rush, no hurry. Just a methodical pace, as if the thing, or whatever it was savoring the fear it was feeding off of. Emma's breath caught in her throat. She wanted to shout, to warn the others, but the words lodged themselves in her chest, thick and heavy. She could feel the weight of the darkness pressing against her. And then the sound stopped. The silence in the lodge was suffocating. No one spoke, no one moved. It was as though they were all waiting for the next sound, the next step. But nothing came. It was like the hallway itself had swallowed the creature, or whatever it was, whole. Emma's eyes darted between the door, now barricaded by the furniture, and the hallway. The sound of the creature outside had stopped too, as though it had been waiting for something. Waiting for this. It was then that she realized, whatever was out there, in the woods, it wasn't the only thing they had to fear. No, something else was inside the lodge, something that had been hiding in the shadows, waiting for the perfect moment to reveal itself. A slow, deliberate creak came from behind her, from the hallway, and Emma froze. Her blood turned to ice as the air around her seemed to shift. The shadows in the hallway were moving again. They weren't just shadows. No, they were alive. The floorboards groaned under the weight of something heavy. Something enormous, something that shouldn't have fit within the walls of the lodge. And then a whisper, a low, hoarse whisper, carried from the hallway so close now Emma could almost feel the breath against her ear. "Leave now." Emma's skin prickled. She didn't turn around. She couldn't. The words seemed to pulse through her veins, wrapping themselves around her heart, squeezing it tighter with every beat. The presence in the hallway was closer now, so close she could feel its weight in the very air, like it was pressing against her chest. The smell of damp earth and decay filled her nostrils, overpowering even the scent of the wood burning in the fire. "Who's there?" she whispered hoarsely, her voice cracking with fear. Nothing answered, but the shadows continued to shift. There was movement in them now, distinct and purposeful. She could see it, a figure stepping forward from the darkness, impossibly tall, its limbs too long, too thin, like a twisted version of a man. It moved with a smooth, unnerving grace, its feet never making a sound as they touched the floor. The figure was cloaked in darkness, but its shape, its outline, was unmistakable. Emma could see the faintest glimmer of something pale, something that could have been a face, but it was too hidden in the shadow to be sure. "Get back," Jake said suddenly, his voice harsh. He grabbed Emma's arm, pulling her toward the corner of the room, away from the hallway. But it was too late. The thing in the hallway stepped into the firelight, and Emma's breath caught in her throat. It was tall, impossibly tall, its body hunched over like it was too big for the room. Its limbs were long and spindly, covered in what looked like tattered rags, though they were too thin to be real fabric. Its face was hidden beneath a hood, but Emma could see the faint outline of something beneath the shadow, something pale and twisted. Its mouth, wide and open, was full of sharp, jagged teeth, and from within it, a low, wheezing breath echoed through the lodge. The creature tilted its head slightly as if studying them. Its eyes, if they could even be called eyes, glowed with an eerie light, like burning embers in the dark. And then, with an unsettling slowness, it began to speak. "Leave, or you will be part of this place forever." Its voice was like the sound of dry leaves rustling in the wind, sharp and rasping, as if it had been buried in the earth for centuries, only now emerging to haunt them. Emma's heart pounded in her chest as her mind raced. There was no escaping. The lodge was sealed, the storm was outside, and now this thing, this, whatever it was here in the very heart of Briarwood. She could feel it closing in, like a noose tightening around her neck, drawing her toward the darkness. The whispers were louder now, not just in her ears, but in her mind, swirling in her thoughts, infecting her with their dread. Jake stepped forward, his voice trembling with disbelief. What do you want from us?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper, as if speaking too loudly would provoke the thing. The creature didn't answer immediately. Instead, it raised one of its long, skeletal hands and pointed toward the door. It was a gesture so slow, so deliberate, that Emma could feel the weight of it in her chest. The air grew colder, the shadows deepened, and the fire's light flickered dangerously, casting eerie shapes against the walls. "You will not leave," the creature finally rasped, its voice growing colder. "None leave, not once they come." Before anyone could respond, the figure began to move again, its long limbs gliding silently across the floor toward them. The fire's glow seemed to waver in its presence, the light dimming as though the darkness was swallowing it whole. And then, in the blink of an eye, the creature was gone, swallowed back into the shadows of the hallway. But the weight of its presence remained, heavy and suffocating, like a cold hand resting on their chests. The room was silent once more, but the tension was unbearable. The whispers were gone, but Emma could feel them still, crawling under her skin. "What was that?" Sarah's voice trembled as she finally spoke, her eyes wide with terror. "I don't know," Jake replied, his voice shaky. "But we have to get out of here. Now." But deep down, Emma knew. There was no getting out of Briarwood Lodge. Not now. Not ever. The oppressive silence in the lodge seemed to stretch on forever, the air thick with the heavy weight of something unspoken, something that had entered with the creature and was now suffocating them from within. The fire crackled weakly in the hearth, casting flickering shadows against the walls, but the warmth it provided was barely a comfort anymore. The lodge itself felt colder, darker. The walls seemed to pulse with the echoes of the creature's presence, its words lingering like a curse, impossible to shake. "We need to leave," Jake's voice cut through the stillness, but there was no conviction in his words. He didn't believe it himself. None of them did. They were trapped. There was no escape. Emma could feel the dread tightening around her chest, a vice that grew tighter with every passing second. Her breath was shallow, her limbs trembling as if they no longer belonged to her. She had seen it. She had seen the thing, tall, emaciated, its glowing eyes boring into her very soul. And now it was as if the lodge itself had become part of it. The darkness, the whispers, the presence that hung like a fog, everything was intertwined, suffocating them. "We can't leave," she whispered, the words escaping her before she even realized she'd spoken. Jake turned to her, his face a mirror of her fear. "What do you mean? We can't stay here. That thing, it said we won't leave." "I know," Emma said, her voice barely audible. But it's not just that. It's the lodge. There's something wrong with this place. It's like it's alive, like it's been waiting for us, feeding off the storm, off the fear." Sarah stepped forward, her face pale, her eyes wide with a mixture of terror and disbelief. "Are you saying the lodge is cursed?" Emma didn't answer immediately. She didn't need to. The truth was too clear to deny. This place, Briarwood Lodge, was no ordinary lodge. It had never been just a quiet retreat in the woods. It had been built on something ancient, something dark. And now it had come alive, waking from its slumber as the storm rolled in, as the wind howled and the trees bent under the force of something greater than nature itself. "What do we do?" Mark's voice was strained, but there was no sign of the adventurous, confident hiker from earlier. He looked like a man on the edge of breaking, his eyes darting around the room, as if he expected the walls to close in on him at any moment. "We don't have a choice," Jake said, his voice shaking, but the resolve in his eyes was unmistakable. "We need to find a way out of here." Emma shook her head. "There is no way out. Don't you understand? That thing," she stopped herself, her throat tightening. "It's not just the storm or the forest. This place, it doesn't let people leave. It traps them here." Sarah's lips trembled. "That's insane. We can't." But Emma interrupted her. "You saw it too. You heard it. You felt it." Her voice grew more desperate with each word. "That thing, whatever it is, it's not just some creature. It's part of the lodge. It's part of the land. It's feeding on us, feeding on our fear." For a long moment, no one spoke. The tension in the room grew thicker, heavier. The only sound was the relentless howling of the wind outside and the occasional crack of thunder. The fire sputtered, sending sparks shooting up the chimney, but even the flames seemed to be flickering in terror, fighting to stay alive in the face of the growing darkness. I don't want to die here," Sarah whispered, her voice breaking. "I don't want to be trapped in this place." Mark reached out and grabbed her arm, his grip tight. "We're not going to die here. We can find a way out. We have to." "We can't," Emma said again, her voice low, almost like a prayer. "This place doesn't let people leave. It never has." Jake's expression was hard, but his eyes betrayed his fear. "How do you know that? How could you know something like that?" Emma closed her eyes, taking a deep breath. She didn't want to say the words, didn't want to admit what she had come to realize. But there was no choice. The truth was already in the air, hanging like a dark cloud, suffocating them all. "My grandmother," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "She used to tell me stories about places like this. Old, abandoned places in the woods where the land itself was cursed. Places that drew people in, lured them with promises of peace, only to trap them forever. She called them anchors. They feed on the living, on fear and despair, and once they have enough, they keep you here. Forever." The silence that followed felt like an eternity. Mark, Sarah, and Jake stared at her in disbelief, the weight of her words sinking in like a stone in their chests. The fire crackled in the corner, but it did nothing to chase away the chill that had settled over the room. "Are you telling us," Mark's voice faltered, "that we're stuck here? That there's no way out?" Emma nodded, her throat tight. "That thing, whatever it is, the creature we saw, it's part of the lodge. It's a guardian, an entity bound to the land. It's the thing that keeps people from leaving. The more you fear it, the stronger it gets. The more it feeds, the tighter its grip on you becomes." Then what?" Sarah asked, her eyes wild with panic. "What do we do? How do we get out?" Emma didn't have an answer. She could feel the weight of the curse pressing on her chest, the walls of Briarwood Lodge closing in around them. There was no escape. Not from this place, not from the thing that was watching them, waiting for them to slip further into despair. But there was one thing she knew for certain. The longer they stayed, the stronger the lodge's hold on them would become. The creature would keep coming, feeding off their fear, growing stronger with every passing hour. Eventually, they would all be part of the place, part of the land's darkness, its curse. And when that happened, there would be no escape. The weight of Emma's words settled over them like a cold shroud. The lodge felt darker now, the walls pressing inward, squeezing out every last breath of hope. The fire in the hearth sputtered and flickered, casting long, eerie shadows that stretched across the floor. The storm outside had intensified, the wind howling and thrashing against the lodge like a beast in torment. The trees outside bent violently, their limbs scraping the roof as if trying to tear the lodge apart. The air, thick with tension, carried the faintest scent of wet earth, rotting wood, and decay, like the very land beneath the lodge was rotting from within. The silence that followed Emma's revelation was suffocating. No one spoke. No one moved. They were all trapped in the same horrible reality now, each of them feeling the invisible weight of the curse settling upon their shoulders. It wasn't just the storm that was closing in on them, it was the presence in the lodge, the ancient force that had been waiting for them, watching them with hollow, unseen eyes. Jake broke the silence first, his voice tight with suppressed panic. "What do we do now, Emma? You've been to this place before. What are we supposed to do?" Emma could see the fear in his eyes, could feel the panic beginning to pulse through the room like a living thing. It was the same fear she felt clawing at her chest, urging her to run, to scream, to break free of the suffocating grip of the lodge. But she knew deep down there was no running. There was no escape. Not anymore. I don't know," Emma whispered, her voice barely audible, lost beneath the storm's roar. I thought I could stop it. I thought I could make sense of it all, but the truth is, I'm as trapped as all of you. Mark's face twisted in frustration, his hand clenching into a fist. This can't be happening. We can't just give up. There has to be a way out. There has to be something we can do. There's nothing, Emma said, shaking her head. The lodge, Briarwood, it draws people in, and once it has you, you're part of it. You can't leave. Not until it's fed enough. Until it takes everything. The creature we saw, the thing outside, it's not just some guardian. It's the embodiment of Briarwood's hunger. The land, the trees, the forest itself, they feed on fear, on despair. It draws people here, makes them think they're safe, then, her words trailed off as her throat tightened. Then it takes you, piece by piece. Sarah's face was pale, her eyes wide with disbelief. And we're just supposed to sit here and let it take us? Her voice shook with horror, but there was a bitter edge to it, a hint of desperation. No, Emma said, her voice growing firmer despite the gnawing fear inside her. We fight. We can't just give in. But we have to understand how it works. We have to understand how it feeds before we can even think about escaping. She turned to the others, her gaze hard. We need to destroy the anchor. The thing that ties this place to the land. If we don't, we'll just keep getting pulled deeper and deeper into its grasp. Mark stepped forward, his face lined with determination. And how do we do that? How do we destroy something like this? Emma's mind raced. She had no answers, no clear way to defeat this thing. Her grandmother's stories had only scratched the surface of the horrors Briarwood held. She didn't have the power to banish whatever was here. But there was one thing she could do, one thing she had to try no matter how insane it seemed. I remember, she said softly as if speaking to herself. I remember something my grandmother once told me about the old ways. About the things that kept the curse in check, the rituals that were performed to keep the land from consuming the living. There were stories, old magic. But it was all lost. I don't even know if it still works. You're telling me we need to perform some kind of ritual? Sarah scoffed, though her voice was trembling. You've got to be kidding. It's the only chance we have, Emma replied, her eyes meeting Sarah's, steady despite the fear curling in her stomach. We have to find the heart of Briarwood, the place where the curse began. That's where we'll find the anchor. Once we destroy it, the lodge will lose its power. The creature won't be able to keep us here anymore. The others stared at her in stunned silence. The wind howled louder, rattling the windows as the storm outside seemed to intensify. The trees bent and swayed like giants caught in the grip of some unseen force. Emma could feel the lodge shifting around her, its walls groaning as if in protest to the very idea of her defiance. Do you really believe that? Mark asked quietly. His voice wasn't mocking anymore, but uncertain, as if he, too, had begun to understand just how much danger they were in. Emma nodded, though doubt lingered at the edges of her mind. I have to believe it. Jake stepped forward, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. Then let's do it. If there's even a chance of getting out of here alive, we need to take it. For the first time since they'd arrived, there was a glimmer of resolve in his eyes. The others nodded in agreement, though the fear was still evident in their faces. They were terrified, and rightfully so, but they had no other choice. They couldn't stay in the lodge, couldn't allow it to consume them. We'll need to find the heart of Briarwood, Emma said, taking a deep breath. But the path won't be easy. The curse won't just let us walk through it. We'll have to face whatever the lodge throws at us. Sarah's hands were trembling, but she managed to speak. Where do we start? Emma glanced around the room, her eyes scanning the shadows that seemed to stretch into every corner. The lodge was watching them. The walls were listening. But they had no time to waste. There's a cellar beneath the lodge. My grandmother told me about it. It's hidden, sealed off. If we can find it, it might be the key. It's where the curse began. We'll have to go down into the dark. The wind outside howled in response, and a sudden creaking noise echoed through the lodge, like the building itself was responding to her words, to the defiance in her voice. The fire sputtered in the hearth, its light flickering dangerously, casting unsettling shadows on the walls. I don't know about this, Mark said quietly, his voice trembling. It sounds insane. Going down into the cellar? With everything that's going on. We don't have a choice, Emma said firmly. We can either sit here and wait for it to consume us, or we can try to stop it. This place has taken enough lives already. We can't let it take ours. The decision had been made. And with that, they began to move, slowly, cautiously. Emma led the way toward the back of the lodge, toward the dark hallway that led deeper into the heart of the house. The air grew colder as they passed through the threshold, the shadows stretching long and deep around them. The cellar was at the end of the hallway. As they approached, the creaking of the floorboards beneath their feet became louder, the sound almost mocking, like the house itself was laughing at their feeble attempts to fight back. The whispers started again, louder this time, filling the air with their maddening hiss. Leave, leave, leave. But they kept moving. At the end of the hall, Emma reached out and gripped the cold, rusted doorknob. It turned easily in her hand, but as she opened the door, the smell hit them first. A thick, oppressive scent of rot and decay, like something ancient had been festering for years. The cellar door creaked open with a groan, revealing a set of steep, narrow stairs that descended into blackness. And that was when Emma realized. They weren't just walking into the cellar. They were walking into the heart of Briarwood. The air around the cellar door was thick with the stench of decay, heavier than anything Emma had ever encountered. It wasn't just the damp, earthy smell of an old building. No, this scent was deeper, darker, a miasma that crawled into her lungs, making every breath feel like it was laced with something poisonous. Her heart thudded in her chest, but she forced herself to step forward, gripping the cold, rusted doorknob tightly as she pushed the door open further. The hinges creaked, echoing down the hallway like a warning, but she ignored it. There was no turning back now. Jake, Mark, and Sarah lingered behind her, their eyes wide with fear and uncertainty. None of them moved to follow, as if they were all waiting for someone else to make the first step into the darkness below. But Emma knew that there was no one else. She was the one who had to lead them, for better or worse. "I'll go first," she said, her voice sounding foreign in the silence that had settled over them. It was a voice she barely recognized, firm, determined, but tinged with the dread that churned in her gut. She stepped forward into the cold, dark hallway, and the others followed, their footsteps hesitant. The stairs descended steeply, creaking under their weight as they made their way down. Emma's hand brushed against the stone walls, which were slick with moisture, the air heavy and thick with a musty odor that seemed to cling to everything. Her every step felt slow, deliberate, like something was waiting for her, waiting for them all, just beyond the threshold. The descent seemed endless, the shadows stretching deeper and deeper, until Emma had to strain her eyes to see where the steps ended. At the bottom of the stairs, the ground leveled out into a small, narrow chamber. The air was so thick with moisture it seemed to press against her skin. Emma could barely make out the walls in the dim light, but she could feel their presence around her, pressing in on all sides, like the earth itself was holding her in place. The only sound was the distant thunder, the low rumble of the storm outside, and the occasional drip of water from the ceiling, punctuating the silence with a rhythmic, hollow echo. "Is this it?" Mark asked, his voice echoing unnervingly in the small space. "This is the cellar?" Emma nodded, but her eyes were fixed on the far end of the chamber. There, hidden in the shadows, was something that didn't belong. A small alcove, partly obscured by a thick, gnarly vine that had crawled up the stone wall, its tendrils twisted around the rock like a living thing. But that wasn't what caught her attention. No, what drew her eyes was the dark shape in the alcove, the shape of something large, ancient, and untouched by time. "It's here," she said softly, more to herself than to the others. "The anchor. The heart of Briarwood." The others stepped forward cautiously, their breaths shallow, their eyes wide with fear. They were all aware now, aware of the darkness that pulsed beneath the earth, beneath the lodge. The weight of the place had shifted. It was no longer just a building. It had become something else. Alive. Hungry. The alcove was closer now, and Emma could make out more of its features. The vine that had grown around it was thick and gnarled, its leaves dark and withered, as if they had been soaked in the blood of the earth itself. The ground beneath her feet felt unstable, as if something was stirring beneath the surface. She could feel it, feel the pulse of the land, the thrum of ancient power, like the lodge itself was alive, watching her, waiting for her to approach. "What is it?" Sarah whispered, her voice trembling. Her eyes were fixed on the vine-covered alcove, but she didn't dare step closer. Emma took a breath, forcing herself to speak. "It's the anchor, the source of Briarwood's curse. This is what keeps it alive. This is the thing that feeds on fear, on despair." As Emma stepped forward, she felt a sudden, intense pressure in the air, a crushing weight that threatened to push her back. She ignored it, forcing her feet to move. Every step felt like it took her deeper into a nightmare, each footfall making the air heavier, the space around her more suffocating. The vine-covered alcove was now just a few feet away. Emma reached out to touch it, but as her fingers brushed against the dark tendrils, she felt something strange, a coldness so deep it made her entire body shudder. The vine recoiled slightly as though it had felt her touch, and then, with an unnatural motion, it began to writhe. The earth beneath her feet groaned, and the chamber seemed to tremble. It was as though the very ground was shifting beneath her, as if the land itself had awoken to her presence. The air grew thick with the smell of decay, the scent of something ancient and forgotten. A low, rumbling growl echoed from deep within the stone walls, and Emma could feel the pressure building around her, squeezing tighter with each passing second. "What's happening?" Mark gasped, his voice trembling. Sarah clutched at his arm, eyes wide with panic. "It's alive. It's not just the lodge, it's this." Emma's mind raced. She couldn't stop now. If they didn't destroy this thing, if they didn't sever the anchor's hold on the land, it would never end. The creature, the whispers, the cursed lodge, it would all continue. It would consume them one by one. She stepped closer, her hand shaking as she reached out to grasp the vine. As soon as her fingers closed around it, the air around her seemed to go completely still. The growl stopped. The pressure, the suffocating weight, all of it came to a screeching halt. Emma's heart pounded in her chest, and she dared not look up. She could feel it, though. Something was watching her, something beyond the vine, beyond the darkness. Something ancient and malevolent. The moment she touched the vine, it had awakened. And then it spoke. "You should have left when you had the chance." The voice was low, raspy, and distorted, as though it was coming from somewhere deep underground. It echoed in her bones, vibrating through the very marrow of her body. The words weren't just heard, they were felt. The ground beneath her feet rumbled again, and the stone walls seemed to close in, the space growing smaller, more oppressive. "What are you?" Emma managed to gasp, her throat tight with fear. She couldn't let go of the vine, not yet. Not until she understood. "You are my feast," the voice hissed, each word dragging out like nails on a chalkboard. "You were drawn to me. You are here to serve me, to feed me." The vine twisted in her hand, its tendrils wrapping around her wrist like cold, serpentine fingers. The others' voices were silent now, their fear palpable, but Emma could feel them behind her, frozen in place as if the very presence of the vine had stolen their will. "You will all stay," the voice whispered. "You will all serve." Emma's chest tightened as the grip on her wrist tightened, and with a surge of willpower, she yanked her hand free. "Not if I destroy you first." The room seemed to tremble with rage. The vine recoiled, thrashing in the air like it had been struck, its tendrils flailing wildly. The growl returned, louder now, shaking the very stones of the cellar. And then something shifted, a deep, guttural rumble coming from deep within the earth itself. Something huge was awakening, and the walls around them began to crack. "We can't stop it," Mark whispered, his voice trembling with the weight of truth. Emma looked back at him, at all of them. "Yes, we can," she said through gritted teeth. "We have to." The ground beneath Emma's feet continued to tremble, as though the very foundations of the earth were coming apart. The vine, the anchor, twisted in her hand like a living thing, its tendrils thrashing violently in response to her defiance. The air grew thicker, colder, as if the darkness in the cellar was tightening around them, suffocating the light from the flames above. A low, guttural growl echoed through the chamber, reverberating in Emma's bones, sending a chill through her entire body. The sound was primal, deep, as though the very land itself was roaring in fury. It was then that she realized, this wasn't just a creature. The voice she had heard, the one that had spoken through the vine, wasn't just the voice of something evil, something predatory. It was the voice of the land itself. Briarwood wasn't simply a lodge in the woods. It was alive. And it had been feeding, waiting for something like them to step into its trap. "You dare to fight me?" The voice came again, sharper this time, filled with seething hatred. "You will never leave. You will never break free. You are mine." The vine tightened around her wrist, its cold, gnarled tendrils digging into her skin, as though the earth itself was trying to claim her. Emma gritted her teeth, fighting the overwhelming pull of the darkness, the pressure that seemed to rise up from beneath the stone floor, threatening to swallow her whole. She could feel the anchor, the heart of Briarwood, pulsing with an ancient, malevolent force, as though it were feeding off her fear, off their fear. She glanced back at the others, their faces pale, their eyes wide with terror. Mark, Sarah, and Jake were frozen in place, their feet unwilling to move as the air seemed to grow heavier with every passing second. It was as if they were all being drawn into the ground, slowly sinking, like the lodge itself was pulling them in, claiming them, one by one. Emma's vision began to blur, the shadows creeping closer, the whispers returning, swirling in her mind, drowning out all rational thought. The temperature in the cellar dropped even further, and she could see her breath, white and thick in the air, as though winter had arrived in the blink of an eye. "Emma, we need to do something." Jake's voice was distant, strained, barely audible over the increasing roar of the growl. but it reached her nonetheless. She could see him struggling, his hands clenched tightly at his sides, but his feet refused to move. He was frozen, trapped in the same invisible grip that held them all. "You're too late," the voice from the vine hissed again, cruel and mocking. "The heart of Briarwood is mine. You cannot undo what is already done." Emma's heart pounded in her chest as the vine tightened further, squeezing the life out of her wrist. The pressure was unbearable, the sharp, icy tendrils digging into her skin, and she could feel the blood being drawn from her, siphoned away by the ancient power that lived in the earth beneath them. But she fought. She had to fight. If she didn't, they would be consumed by Briarwood, just like the others who had come before them. With a burst of strength, Emma yanked her arm back, wrenching it from the vine's grasp, the tendrils snapping off with a sickening sound. The vine recoiled violently, but Emma had no time to think. She had to act now. If she didn't sever the connection, if she didn't destroy the anchor, it would be the end of them all. But as she reached into her jacket pocket for the small knife she'd brought along, her last hope, something inside her told her that a simple blade wouldn't be enough. This force was older than steel. It was older than anything she could comprehend. Suddenly, the floor beneath her cracked, and the chamber rumbled like a beast waking from a centuries-long slumber. The shadows in the cellar seemed to come alive, coiling and writhing around her legs, wrapping themselves around her like living ropes. The walls seemed to breathe, their cracks widening, revealing blackness deeper than anything natural. The ground itself split open, revealing a dark, glowing pit beneath her feet, a vortex that pulsed with an unearthly light, pulling at her, pulling at everything. And then, from the pit, a shape began to emerge. It was tall, taller than any man, its form shifting and undulating like smoke, but with substance. Its body was made of the very darkness around them, a shadow so dense that it seemed to swallow the light of the flickering flames. Its face, or what could be called a face, was obscured by a mass of black, roiling tendrils, like an endless cascade of darkness. And its eyes, if they could be called eyes, were like pits of burning ash, empty and endless, gazing into her soul with a hunger that went beyond anything she had ever known. "You cannot defeat me," the voice came again, now deeper, more thunderous, as if it was rising from the earth itself. "I am the hunger of Briarwood. I am the forest's blood. You are nothing." The others began to scream, their voices breaking through the growing roar of the darkness around them. Mark and Sarah tried to move, but their bodies were frozen, as if the air itself was holding them in place. Jake was the only one who seemed to be fighting, but even he struggled, his every movement slow and pained, as if the force of Briarwood was pushing against him, holding him back. Emma felt the pull of the pit beneath her feet, the deep, inescapable gravity of the void below, and it was all she could do to remain upright. She wanted to scream. She wanted to run. But deep down, she knew that the only way out of this was to sever the heart, to destroy the anchor. The vine. The darkness. She remembered her grandmother's words then, the old tales, the whispered stories that had seemed so fantastical when she was a child, but now felt all too real. There was only one way to break the curse. Only one way to banish Briarwood. She had to destroy the heart, and not just the vine. She had to burn it. Without thinking, she pulled the matchbox from her pocket and struck a match. The flame sputtered to life in the cold air of the cellar, flickering like a fragile thread of hope in the dark. She had no plan, no strategy, but she had to act. With a shaking hand, she reached toward the vine again, this time holding the match close. The moment the flame touched the tendril, it let out a terrible shriek, a sound so horrible it nearly knocked her off her feet. The fire licked the vine, and the creature let out a roar so loud it shook the very foundation of Briarwood Lodge. The earth trembled beneath them, and the pit widened, threatening to swallow everything in its path. But Emma refused to let go. The vine began to writhe and thrash in the flames, its once mighty tendrils curling in on themselves, blackened and smoking. The creature's screams grew louder, more desperate, as the flames spread along the vine. "You will not take us," Emma shouted, though her voice was barely audible over the roar of the fire, the cracking of the walls, and the deafening growls that filled the air. The fire blazed brighter, hotter, until the vine was nothing but charred remains, crumbling into ash. And then, in the split second before everything around her exploded into chaos, Emma saw it. The heart of Briarwood, the true heart, was not the vine. It was the very ground beneath their feet. And with one final, desperate cry, the fire consumed it all. The moment the fire touched the heart of Briarwood, the ground shook violently. The very earth seemed to ripple beneath Emma's feet, a deep, bone-rattling tremor that split the stone walls of the cellar. The fire spread rapidly, igniting the vine with a terrifying, unnatural speed. It burned with a sickly greenish hue, casting long distorted shadows that danced wildly around the chamber. The smell of burning flesh, not human, not animal, wafted up from the fire, thick and nauseating, mixing with the sour scent of rotting wood and earth. Emma's heart pounded in her chest, her breath shallow and ragged, but she couldn't tear her eyes away from the scene unfolding in front of her. The flames grew higher, hotter, as though the very essence of Briarwood was fighting against the destruction, the curse pushing back against the tiny spark of rebellion. The tendrils of the vine writhed and snapped, but Emma could feel that it wasn't just the vine that was burning. The fire was attacking the very soul of Briarwood, the foundation of the land itself. And then, from deep within the earth, a terrible, deafening roar erupted. It was a sound like no other, a guttural, earth-shaking noise that came from the core of Briarwood. The walls of the cellar cracked, dust and debris falling from the ceiling as if the land itself was convulsing, trying to expel the invaders, them. The force was so intense, it felt like a storm was rising within the very walls of the lodge. The fire in front of her burned brighter, the tendrils snapping and hissing like they were alive, struggling to pull away from the flames that were consuming them. No! The voice roared from the depths of the land, and Emma's heart froze in her chest. It was the voice of Briarwood itself, the voice of something ancient and hungry, filled with centuries of rage and pain. You cannot undo what has been done. You are mine. You will be my feast. The ground beneath Emma's feet cracked wide open, revealing a swirling mass of darkness, an endless void that reached up from the pit, hungry and insatiable. The shadows from the pit coiled around her legs, twisting like serpents, pulling her down into the abyss. It was as if Briarwood itself was clawing at her, trying to drag her into the depths, into the heart of its curse. You cannot escape, the voice hissed, louder this time, more desperate, its fury shaking the very air around her. You belong to Briarwood. Emma felt the shadows tugging at her, the darkness creeping up her body, but she fought back. She refused to be consumed by this place. Her hand gripped the matchbox tightly, and without thinking, she struck another match, setting fire to the air around her. The match flared to life, a tiny beacon against the overwhelming darkness, and she tossed it onto the ground at the edge of the pit. The fire burst into life, spreading like wildfire, reaching up toward the swirling mass of darkness. The air around her began to heat to unbearable levels, the fire raging like a furious storm, tearing at the very foundation of Briarwood. But the ground beneath her feet kept breaking, as if the very earth was crumbling, giving way to the curse that had lain dormant for centuries. The roar of the land grew deafening, the earth splitting open further, as if the very fabric of reality was being torn apart. Emma's legs were trembling from the force of the pull, but she pushed herself forward, stumbling away from the pit, pulling herself toward the others. They had to move. They had to escape before it was too late. Mark and Sarah were still frozen, their faces pale with terror, their eyes wide as they stared at the chaos unfolding before them. Jake was the only one who had begun to move, his body jerking with panic as he tried to pull himself away from the pull of the dark vortex. Jake. Emma screamed, her voice barely audible over the chaos. We have to get out of here, now. But as she spoke, the ground beneath them cracked wider, the dark vortex expanding, swallowing everything in its path. The storm outside seemed to intensify, the wind howling, the trees thrashing against the lodge like living creatures trying to tear it apart. The fire flickered, the shadows rising higher and higher, as if they were alive, reaching for them, hungry for their souls. You cannot leave, the voice from the pit thundered, its tone dripping with venom. You will stay, forever. You belong to me. To Briarwood. Emma's heart raced, and she forced herself to move, pulling Mark and Sarah toward the stairs, her legs heavy with the weight of dread. But every step was like pushing through water, the air thick with the presence of the land, the curse that was pushing back against them. The walls of the cellar groaned and cracked, the very structure of the lodge bending under the pressure. The fire had consumed the vine, but it had only made the curse more furious, more determined. The shadow from the pit surged upward, a massive wave of darkness, reaching out to engulf them. The walls around them crumbled, the ceiling buckling under the force. The fire that had once been their ally now flickered and dimmed, struggling to survive against the immense pull of the curse. The ground beneath them shook harder, and the air was filled with the deafening roar of the earth itself, as if it were screaming in agony. The stairs were just ahead, but they felt miles away. Emma could feel the pull of the vortex, the tug of the curse that was trying to drag them back into the pit, into the endless darkness of Briarwood. She stumbled forward, her feet slipping on the cracked stone, the weight of the land's rage pressing down on her, slowing her movements. "Leave, now," the voice growled again, a low, guttural hiss that came from deep within the earth. The shadow surged closer, its tendrils wrapping around her legs, its cold touch biting into her skin. Emma's breath came in ragged gasps as she reached for the stairs, her hand gripping the railing as she pulled herself forward. "You will stay." The voice came again, so close now, its words like a slap across her face. "You will never leave." But Emma wasn't listening anymore. She couldn't. She couldn't afford to. With one final desperate lunge, she reached the stairs, pulling herself up, her body shaking with exhaustion and terror. Mark and Sarah were behind her, struggling to move, but Emma didn't wait. She couldn't wait. She ran up the stairs, every step feeling like it was a battle, every step fighting against the pull of briarwood, the curse that was closing in on them. When she reached the top, she turned back, her eyes scanning the cellar one last time. The fire was still burning, but it was weak, flickering like it was about to go out. The shadows in the cellar were retreating, but the pit, the heart of briarwood, was still open, still raging. And as Emma slammed the door behind her, she realized something. It wasn't over. Not yet. Briarwood would never let them go. Not until it had consumed every last piece of their fear, their pain. Not until it had taken everything. But Emma wasn't ready to give up. Not yet. The door slammed shut with a deafening crack that seemed to echo through the very walls of Briarwood Lodge. Emma didn't stop to catch her breath, didn't pause to look back at the destruction unfolding below. She turned on her heel and ran, her feet pounding against the wooden floor, the echoes of her desperate flight ringing in her ears. The air around her was thick, heavy with the oppressive presence of briarwood, the curse that clung to everything, that seeped into the walls and floor like poison. Every step she took seemed to reverberate with the dread that had followed them since the moment they had entered the lodge. Her mind was a whirlwind of thoughts, fragmented and incoherent, but one thing was crystal clear. They weren't free. Not yet. Briarwood wasn't finished with them. It was waiting, watching, biding its time. "We can't outrun it," Mark's voice cracked as he caught up with her, his breath shallow. "We can't outrun it, Emma." Emma's heart was pounding, but she didn't dare look back. She could feel the weight of the curse pressing on her, tightening around her chest like an invisible hand, threatening to choke her. But she kept moving, pushing forward, her legs carrying her through the dark, narrow hallways of the lodge. Her mind kept repeating one thing: there has to be another way. There has to be another way to break the curse. "We need to get to the woods," she said breathlessly, her voice hoarse. "We need to get out of here, away from the lodge, away from the heart of briarwood." But as the words left her lips, she knew how hollow they sounded. The woods themselves weren't safe. They were part of it, part of the curse that had rooted itself in the land long before they had arrived. Briarwood was a living thing, an entity, and it would follow them. It would always follow them, no matter where they went. "No, Emma." Sarah's voice trembled as she joined them, her eyes wide with terror. She glanced back at the door they had just slammed shut, as if she feared it would burst open at any moment. "The woods? If we go into the woods, we'll never get out." Emma's chest tightened as she heard the truth in Sarah's words. It wasn't just the lodge. The curse, the creature, the darkness, it was all connected to the land itself. The woods were no different. They were part of briarwood. The forest was its body, its pulse, its hunger. It was where the curse had begun, and it was where it would end. "There has to be something," Emma muttered under her breath, her mind racing. She needed answers. There was no escaping briarwood, not by running, not by hiding. It was everywhere, always watching. The storm outside had intensified, the wind howling, rattling the windows as the trees lashed against the lodge. The rain had turned to a torrential downpour, the water cascading in sheets, as if the heavens themselves were weeping. Emma knew what the storm meant. Briarwood was awakening in full force. The land had stirred, and it wouldn't stop until it had consumed them all. Jake stumbled ahead, his face pale and strained. "We can't just keep running. What do we do? Where do we go?" His voice was panicked, a note of desperation creeping in. Emma didn't have an answer for him. The lodge's shadows loomed larger now, their tendrils stretching into every corner of the hall, curling like smoke, flickering in the edges of her vision. The air felt oppressive, suffocating. The walls themselves seemed to hum with a deep, pulsing energy, a dark force that pressed against them all. As they moved through the hallway, Emma noticed something strange. The lights overhead flickered intermittently, and the temperature seemed to drop with every step they took. It was as though they were walking through a corridor of nightmares, the walls closing in on them from all sides. The whispers returned, faint at first but growing louder. Words they couldn't understand, Words of hunger, of death, of eternal night, echoed in the recesses of Emma's mind. She could almost hear the land itself breathing. "You cannot escape," the voice of Briarwood growled, low and guttural. It wasn't coming from anywhere in particular, but everywhere at once. The voice rumbled through the walls, vibrating in the air around them. It felt as though the lodge was alive, its very essence entwined with the earth, the trees, and the wind. It was all one. Briarwood was everywhere. "No matter where you go," the voice continued, "I will find you." Emma shook her head, her teeth clenched as she forced herself to focus. She had to stop this. They couldn't escape it, but maybe they could end it. The thought flickered in her mind like a spark in the dark, and she grabbed onto it with both hands. "What if we destroy the heart?" she muttered, more to herself than anyone else. "What if we destroy the land itself?" The others stopped. For a moment, Emma wasn't sure if they had heard her, if they had understood. They stood in the hallway, their eyes wide, their breathing shallow. Then slowly Mark spoke, his voice uncertain. "Destroy the land? Oh, it's everywhere. We're in it." Sarah glanced back at the door they had left behind, then turned her gaze to Emma. "What are you saying? How do we even begin to destroy something like this?" Emma didn't know. She didn't have a clear plan, but the idea had taken root. The land wasn't just the trees or the soil. It wasn't just the lodge. It was everything. It was the forest, the earth beneath their feet, the wind howling through the branches outside, and the very darkness that pulsed around them. But maybe, just maybe, there was a way to sever it, to break its hold. "Maybe we don't need to destroy everything," Emma said slowly, her thoughts coming together in a hazy, desperate sort of clarity. "Maybe we just need to destroy the source, the thing that keeps it alive. The anchor." The others looked at her, their faces a mixture of fear and confusion. "The vine," Jake said slowly, his voice trembling. "The thing you were talking about in the cellar?" "Yes," Emma replied. "But it's not just the vine. It's the heart of Briarwood. It's the thing that keeps the curse tied to this place. It's what binds the forest to the lodge, what keeps the land alive with hunger. We can destroy it, but we need to find it first." The others looked at each other, uncertainty in their eyes. The storm outside was fierce now, and the wind seemed to rattle the very foundation of the lodge. Emma could feel the pressure building again, the curse pushing back against them, refusing to let go. "Where do we even begin?" Sarah asked, her voice small. "The woods," Emma said firmly, her voice growing steadier as she realized what they had to do. "We need to go back to the heart of Briarwood. The woods, they're the source. The real heart of the curse is out there. And that's where we need to go." "But the woods," Mark whispered. "It'll never end, will it?" Emma shook her head. "No, it won't. But maybe we can break it. If we destroy the heart, it'll all stop." She could see the doubt in their eyes, the fear. It was the same fear that had been haunting them since they stepped foot in the lodge. But now there was something else too. A glimmer of hope, however small, that perhaps they could survive, that they could break free from the grip of Briarwood. "Let's go," Emma said, her voice filled with quiet determination. "We'll face it together." They all nodded, their resolve slowly strengthening, and together they turned toward the door. Outside, the storm raged on, the wind howling through the trees as if warning them to turn back. But they didn't. Not this time. The moment they stepped outside, the world around them seemed to transform. The storm had reached its peak, the wind whipping violently through the trees, bending the branches to their breaking point. The rain poured down in sheets, drenching them within seconds as if Briarwood itself were trying to wash them away, to drown them in its fury. But Emma didn't stop. She couldn't. The feeling in her chest, the heavy, suffocating pressure that had plagued her since they'd arrived, was worse out here, more palpable, as though the very air was thick with malice. The wind howled like a creature in pain, whipping the leaves into a frenzy, sending them spiraling through the air in a chaotic dance. The trees seemed to sway, their gnarled branches reaching out like skeletal fingers, clawing at the sky. It was as though the forest itself was alive, an extension of Briarwood's hunger, eager to consume anything that dared enter. "Turn back." The voice came from nowhere and everywhere at once. It was the voice of the forest, of the land itself, filled with rage and sorrow. "You cannot escape. You are mine." The words sent a shiver down Emma's spine, but she kept moving. The others hesitated behind her, their faces pale, their eyes wide with fear. But there was no choice now. There was no turning back. Briarwood had already claimed them, and it wasn't going to let them go unless they fought, unless they destroyed its heart. "Keep moving," Emma urged, her voice barely audible over the storm's roar. Her heart was pounding in her chest. but she refused to let the fear take control. "We have to get to the heart of Briarwood. We don't have much time." The ground beneath their feet was slick with mud and rain, and the trees loomed over them, casting long, twisted shadows that seemed to stretch far beyond what was possible. The forest felt unnaturally silent, save for the howling wind. It was as though the woods themselves were holding their breath, waiting for something to happen. The whispers were gone now, replaced by the booming growl of the storm, the pulse of Briarwood's anger reverberating through the earth. Every step they took felt like an eternity. The path ahead was nearly invisible in the torrential downpour, the thick foliage obscuring their way. Emma's mind raced as she tried to remember the stories her grandmother had told her, the warnings about Briarwood and the cursed woods surrounding it. The deeper they went, the stronger the pull became, the force of Briarwood's curse seeping into her bones, making her head spin. She could feel it just beneath her skin, crawling up her spine, threatening to overtake her. "Leave," the voice boomed again, much closer this time. "You cannot escape me." Emma didn't flinch. Instead, she pushed forward, her eyes fixed on the path ahead. The others followed, but she could feel their hesitation, the weight of their fear pressing down on them. They had seen what Briarwood could do. They had felt its power firsthand, and they knew that no matter what they did, they might never escape it. The trees began to thin, and the dense forest started to open up into a clearing. Emma's breath caught in her throat as she saw what lay ahead, a massive stone altar, ancient and weathered by centuries of neglect. It was surrounded by twisted roots and gnarled trees, their bark blackened and charred. The air around the altar was thick with an unnatural stillness, the wind no longer howling but replaced by an eerie silence. It was as though the forest itself was holding its breath, waiting for them to arrive. There, in the center of the altar, lay a strange, glowing object, an orb of dark, swirling energy pulsing with an ominous rhythm. It was the heart of Briarwood, the source of its curse. The anchor that had bound the forest to the lodge, that had kept its hunger alive for centuries. Emma could feel its power, its pull deep within her chest, like a heartbeat echoing in her veins. It was alive. It was watching them. "This is it," Emma whispered, her voice barely audible, her heart pounding. "This is the heart of Briarwood, the source of the curse." She stepped forward, her hand reaching out, but the moment her fingers brushed the air around the orb, the ground beneath her feet rumbled. The trees around the clearing groaned, their twisted roots shifting like massive serpents, writhing beneath the earth. The orb flared brightly, casting an eerie glow across the clearing, and the ground split open, revealing an enormous pit, its depths endless and black. The wind picked up again, howling louder than ever, as if the very earth was tearing itself apart. The voice of Briarwood erupted once more furious than ever, shaking the ground beneath them. "You cannot destroy me." Emma staggered back, her heart racing. The power of the orb was overwhelming, and for a moment she thought she might collapse. The air was thick with energy, a dark, suffocating force that wrapped around her like a vice, squeezing the breath from her lungs. "We have to destroy it," Emma said, her voice steady despite the fear that clung to her every word. "We have to break the heart of Briarwood. If we don't, it'll never stop." But as she said the words, the orb pulsed again, and a deep, earth-shattering growl filled the air. From the shadows, something moved, something huge, something ancient. It stepped into the clearing, its shape slowly becoming clear. It was a figure of darkness, a towering silhouette, its body made of the very shadows of Briarwood, an amalgamation of the forest's cursed energy. It was the creature, the one they had seen outside the lodge. But this time it was no longer an illusion. It was real. And it was enormous, towering over them, its eyes glowing with malevolent hunger. The creature's voice was a guttural growl, deep and unsettling as it spoke to them. "You think you can destroy me?" it hissed. "I am Briarwood. I am the land, the forest, the darkness. You cannot break what is already eternal." Sarah screamed, her body trembling with terror, but Emma didn't flinch. She couldn't afford to. She had to end this to stop it, or else they would all be consumed. "We will destroy you," Emma said, her voice filled with resolve, even though the fear clawed at her throat. "We will end this curse no matter what it takes." Mark was the first to move, pulling a small object from his bag, a vial filled with a strange, glowing liquid. It was something Emma hadn't noticed before, something that he had kept hidden. He stepped forward, his hands trembling, and held it up to the orb. "This is the only way," he said quietly, his voice filled with quiet desperation. "This is what we need to destroy the heart." Emma's eyes widened as she understood. The vial was filled with the essence of the old magic, the magic that had been used to bind Briarwood to the land in the first place. If they could use it to sever the connection, to destroy the anchor once and for all, the curse would end. The creature, Briarwood, would lose its power. But as Mark approached the orb, the ground rumbled again, the creature's growl shaking the air. "You will not destroy me," it bellowed, its voice rising in fury. "You cannot break what I am." But Emma wasn't listening anymore. With one final, desperate breath, she stepped forward, her eyes locked on the glowing orb. And together they made their move. The orb pulsed ominously in the center of the clearing, its dark, swirling energy sending tremors through the ground. The trees around them creaked and groaned, their ancient limbs snapping and twisting as the creature's rage filled the air. Emma's heart raced, but her resolve was stronger than ever. The creature, Briarwood itself, towered before them, its massive form writhing and shifting like an endless shadow, a nightmare made flesh. It was both ethereal and tangible, its eyes glowing with the same malicious fire that burned at the core of the forest. It was everywhere, in the air, in the earth, in the very essence of the land itself. "You cannot win," the creature growled, its voice like a thunderstorm, low and rumbling. "You think you can break the bond, destroy the heart, but you are fools. This forest is eternal. This curse is eternal. You cannot escape it." The ground beneath Emma's feet trembled again, the soil cracking open like a wound in the earth. She could feel the curse pulling at her, a heavy weight, a suffocating presence that seeped into her bones, trying to drag her down into the pit. She could feel Briarwood's hunger, feel its ancient, insatiable desire to consume. The air was thick with its power, and for a moment, Emma felt as if she might collapse under the pressure. The creature's shadow loomed over them, and she could see its tendrils reaching out, like claws, toward her and her friends. But Emma didn't move. She couldn't afford to. She had to act, and she had to act now. Mark stepped forward, his hands shaking as he held the vial of glowing liquid up to the orb. The liquid inside it shimmered with an ethereal, pulsing light, like a force of pure magic. It was the last of the old magic, the magic that had once been used to bind Briarwood, to give it its power, and now it would be the magic that would sever that bond. "This is the end, Briarwood," Emma said, her voice unwavering despite the terror clawing at her throat. "You will not control us any longer. You will not consume this land or anyone else." The creature howled in fury, a deafening roar that rattled the trees and shook the very ground beneath their feet. The wind picked up again, howling through the branches, pushing against them, trying to force them back. But Emma didn't move. She couldn't. Not now. They had come too far. Mark, his face pale and grim, stepped closer to the orb. His hand trembled as he uncorked the vial, releasing the glowing liquid. It poured from the bottle in a steady stream, and as it touched the orb, the air around them seemed to crackle with energy. The earth rumbled again, louder this time, as if Briarwood itself was resisting, struggling against the power that Mark had unleashed. For a moment, nothing happened. The orb sat there, swirling with its dark energy, its pulse steady and unyielding. But then the light from the vial began to interact with the orb's dark core. A sharp, crackling sound filled the air, and Emma felt the air around her hum with power. The orb began to shift, its swirling darkness fighting against the light, but the glowing liquid from the vial was overpowering, overwhelming the heart of Briarwood. "No!" the creature screamed, its voice rising in a wild crescendo of fury. "This is my forest, my home. You cannot take it from me." The trees around them groaned and snapped, the ground cracking open further as if the very land was fighting to stay intact. But the orb, the heart of Briarwood, was beginning to break apart. The swirling darkness began to fray, unraveling at the edges, as though the ancient power that had bound it together was finally weakening. Emma's eyes locked onto the orb. She could feel the energy in the air, thick and electric, building to a breaking point. The pressure in the clearing was unbearable, the wind howling, the rain lashing against their faces. The very fabric of the forest was tearing apart around them. She could hear the creature's roars, louder and louder, as if it were being pulled apart, as if it were fighting against the inevitable. But Emma stood her ground. She had come this far. They had all come this far. "You cannot destroy me." The creature's voice was now a frantic, desperate shriek. "I am Briarwood. I am the trees, the wind, the roots. I am the hunger that never ends." Mark's hand was shaking violently, the vial almost empty now, its glowing liquid long gone, and yet the orb still pulsed with dark energy, its grip on the land still unyielding. Emma took a step forward, and she could feel the earth trembling beneath her, the curse pressing down on her with the weight of centuries of darkness. But still she did not falter. She turned to the others. "We need to finish this. Together." Sarah nodded, her face pale but resolute, her eyes filled with fear and determination. Mark, too, seemed to find a new resolve. His hand, though trembling, was steady as he reached for the last remnants of the vial. With a swift, almost ritualistic motion, he poured the last drop onto the orb. The moment the final drop touched the heart, the orb erupted in a blinding flash of light. A pulse of energy shot out from the center of the clearing, sending a shockwave through the trees. The earth cracked wide open, the very ground buckling under the force. The creature screamed again, its cry filled with pure agony as the heart of Briarwood was torn apart, its energy ripped away, its grip on the land shattered. For a moment, there was nothing but silence. The wind stilled. The trees stopped groaning. The earth, though cracked and broken, seemed to hold its breath. And then the darkness began to retreat. Slowly at first, but then faster, as if something ancient, something powerful, was finally being undone. The twisted roots of the trees pulled back from the altar, the blackened bark fading, the once gnarled and tortured branches relaxing, as though they were being freed from an eternal prison. The air around them lightened, and the oppressive weight that had hung over the forest began to lift. The forest, which had once felt so alive with malevolent energy, seemed to exhale, its curse finally broken. The dark, swirling vortex of Briarwood began to dissipate, its shadowy form collapsing in on itself, until it was nothing but a wisp of smoke in the wind. The creature, the manifestation of Briarwood's curse, let out one last agonized roar before it vanished, fading into the ether like a nightmare fading with the dawn. Emma took a deep breath, her legs weak, her body shaking from the strain of the battle. But there was no time to rest, not yet. They had broken the heart, but the land was still scarred. It would take time for the forest to heal, for Briarwood to truly release its hold. She turned to the others, her eyes meeting theirs, the weight of what they had done settling over them like a heavy cloak. "It's over," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "We've broken the curse." But deep down, she knew it wasn't truly over. Briarwood had been a force of nature, a hunger that had existed for centuries, and though they had severed its heart, the scars it had left would never fully fade. The land would heal, but it would take time. And the memories of this night would haunt them forever. The wind had stopped. The eerie stillness that followed the destruction of Briarwood's heart was suffocating, almost unnatural. The sky, once a storm-filled canvas of turmoil, now hung heavy with the weight of calm, the clouds slowly parting to reveal a pale, gray moon. The air, still thick with the remnants of Briarwood's curse, felt strangely cool on Emma's skin, the weight of it pressing on her chest like the end of a long nightmare. The trees, once twisted and contorted into grotesque shapes, now stood still, silent and lifeless, their blackened limbs unmoving as though they too were finally at rest. But even in the silence, Emma could feel something. It was subtle at first, almost imperceptible, a faint, distant tremor like the pulse of a dying heart. She felt it deep within the earth beneath her feet, as though the land was still trying to reclaim itself, to heal from the wounds they had caused. But the wound was too deep, too ancient. Briarwood's curse had run too long, and no matter how much they had fought, no matter how much they had sacrificed, it would never truly be gone. Not fully. "Is it over?" Mark's voice trembled in the quiet, breaking the silence like a cracking glass. His eyes were wide, searching the empty clearing with a look of disbelief, as if waiting for something, anything, to confirm that the nightmare had truly ended. Emma looked at him, her body still tingling with the aftereffects of the battle, her mind reeling from the chaos they had just endured. But she knew the answer. It wasn't over, not really. They had severed the heart of Briarwood, but the forest was still there, the land still tainted with its blood. The roots of its curse still twisted deep beneath the surface, lingering like poison in the soil. "We've done what we can," she said softly, her voice steadier than she felt. "The heart is destroyed. Briarwood can't hurt anyone else now." But even as she spoke, she felt a gnawing unease in the pit of her stomach, the weight of their actions beginning to settle in. They had freed the land, yes, but at what cost? What had they left behind in their wake? "What happens now?" Sarah asked, her voice quiet, almost fragile, as she wrapped her arms around herself, her body still trembling from the ordeal. Her eyes were fixed on the trees, but they were no longer filled with the same terror that had been there before. Instead, they were clouded with something deeper, a sense of loss, of uncertainty. Emma's gaze shifted to the trees, her mind still trying to process everything that had happened. The silence was overwhelming, a deafening void that seemed to swallow up everything. The forest, the clearing, the altar, they all felt different now, as if they had crossed some invisible line, a boundary between life and death, between what was real and what was not. She took a deep breath, the cool air filling her lungs, and forced herself to look away from the empty void of the forest. "We need to leave," she said finally, her voice firm. "There's nothing more we can do here. It's over." Mark nodded slowly, though his expression was distant, as though he hadn't quite come to terms with the enormity of what they had just done. "Yeah," he said softly. I can't believe it. It's like everything's too quiet now." Sarah shuddered, her eyes flickering nervously toward the lodge. "What if it comes back?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "What if the curse, or Briarwood, doesn't really die?" Emma didn't have an answer for her, not a reassuring one. There was no denying that part of her still felt that gnawing sense of dread, the heavy weight of the curse still lingering in the air. Briarwood might have been defeated, but the land was scarred. They had broken the heart, yes, but the scars would remain. The energy that had been fed into the forest for centuries couldn't just disappear in an instant. And as much as Emma wanted to believe it was truly over, deep down, she knew the fight wasn't finished. The land would heal in time, yes, but healing took more than time. It took more than simply destroying the heart. It took the land wanting to heal. But there was no time for that now. "We need to get back to the lodge," Emma said, her tone sharp, pushing aside the lingering sense of unease. "We can't stay here." Mark and Sarah exchanged a look but nodded, stepping cautiously toward the path that led back to the lodge. Emma followed, but as she walked, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching them, waiting in the shadows of the forest. It was irrational, she knew that. Briarwood was gone, destroyed, but the feeling of eyes on her, of something waiting just out of sight, refused to leave. The walk back was uneventful. The storm had passed, leaving only the remnants of its fury, wet, broken branches, a sodden earth beneath their feet, the last lingering echoes of the violent wind. The lodge loomed ahead, dark and silent, its windows glowing dimly in the distance, offering a faint sense of safety that Emma knew they all desperately needed. When they finally reached the front steps of the lodge, the familiar, foreboding silence settled around them once more. The door was ajar, creaking slightly in the wind as if waiting for them to enter. It was a stark contrast to the chaotic frenzy they had left behind in the woods. "You're sure we're safe now?" Sarah asked, her voice laced with uncertainty. "I don't know," Emma replied honestly, her gaze fixed on the door. "But I think we've done everything we can." They stepped inside, the door creaking closed behind them, and the world outside felt distant, muffled, as if it no longer belonged to them. The air inside the lodge was damp, still thick with the scent of old wood and mold, but at least it was familiar. Emma felt her shoulders sag with the weight of exhaustion as she leaned against the door, her body feeling like dead weight. The others followed her into the main hall, their steps slow and hesitant. The fire in the hearth was nothing but embers now, the warmth it had once offered long gone, replaced by a chill that had seeped into the bones of the lodge. The silence stretched on, thick and oppressive as they stood there, unsure of what to do next. "We need to rest," Mark finally said, his voice heavy with exhaustion. "Then we figure out what comes next." But Emma couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. She couldn't put her finger on it, but it was there. A subtle, nagging presence in the back of her mind, a feeling that wouldn't go away no matter how hard she tried to ignore it. They had destroyed Briarwood's heart. The curse had been broken, but the land was still alive. The forest, the trees, the very earth that had been tainted by the curse, it was still there. And Emma wasn't sure that destroying one part of it had truly severed the connection between Briarwood and the land. For now, though, there was nothing they could do but wait. But Emma knew this wasn't over. Not completely. And as she glanced back at the darkened window, watching the wind stir the trees outside, a faint shadow flickered across the glass. She wasn't so sure Briarwood was finished with them after all. The night stretched long and heavy, the shadows in the lodge deepening with each passing hour. Outside, the wind had picked up again, but it wasn't the howling storm from earlier. It was quieter now, as though something in the forest had calmed, but Emma felt no relief. She stood near the window, staring out at the still trees, the quiet movement of branches swaying in the breeze. Her eyes scanned the darkened landscape, her mind caught between the relief of having escaped the worst of Briarwood's grip and the gnawing sense that something still lingered in the air, something they hadn't quite dealt with. Her hands gripped the edge of the windowsill, her fingers white with tension as her thoughts spiraled deeper. They had destroyed the heart of Briarwood, the powerful, pulsing orb that had anchored the curse. But had they truly severed the connection? Had they really broken Briarwood's hold on the land, or was there something more, something older, beneath the surface? The forest had seemed to quiet after their battle, but Emma had learned the hard way that quiet didn't always mean safe. Briarwood wasn't just a place. It was a presence, a hunger that had grown with every passing year, feeding on the land and the souls who wandered into its depths. Even now, she could feel it, faint but constant, a whisper in the back of her mind as though the land was waiting, holding its breath. She turned away from the window and glanced over at Mark and Sarah. They were sitting by the fireplace, the flickering light casting long shadows on their faces, their eyes hollow with exhaustion. They hadn't spoken much since they'd returned to the lodge, the weight of what they had experienced pressing down on them like a stone. Mark's voice broke the silence, low and hoarse. "I keep thinking about how it all started, how we ended up here. The stories, the warnings, we didn't listen to any of it. We thought we were just exploring. But this place, this forest, it wasn't just a place. It was alive." Sarah nodded, her eyes downcast, her fingers fiddling with the hem of her sleeve. "It's like we were drawn here, like we were meant to find it. And now, after everything, I don't know. I don't know what we're supposed to do." Emma's gaze shifted back to the fire, watching the embers burn low. The warmth of the flames did little to comfort her. She had been here before. She had felt the overwhelming dread that had consumed them when they first discovered the true nature of Briarwood, and now, with the heart destroyed, there was only emptiness. But emptiness was dangerous. It was nothingness in a place that thrived on hunger. "We didn't have a choice," Emma said, her voice quiet but firm. "We had to destroy it. We had no idea what it would take or what would happen afterward, but we had to fight back. We didn't have the luxury of waiting for answers." Mark shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his eyes distant. "I just don't get it. How could something like that, something so dark, be tied to something so beautiful? Briarwood wasn't always like this. It wasn't always alive." "That's the thing," Emma said softly, her thoughts falling into place. "Briarwood didn't choose to become what it is. It was made to be this way, by the people who lived here, the ones who tried to control it. The forest was a force of nature, a wild thing. But the curse, the magic, twisted it, kept it alive and fed." Sarah let out a shaky breath, her face pale. It wasn't the forest that was evil. It was what was done to it. It wasn't just a place of trees and soil. It was a prison, a feeding ground. "Exactly," Emma murmured. "And when they bound it, they didn't realize that they were trapping something far darker in the process. Briarwood was never meant to be controlled. It was alive, and it wasn't just feeding on the land. It was feeding on fear. It thrived on people coming into it, looking for answers, searching for things they didn't understand. That's what gave it power." Mark ran a hand through his hair, his gaze heavy. "And we walked right into it. We had no choice," Emma said, her voice more resolute now. "And we still don't. We have to face what we've done, what we've unleashed. There's more to this than just destroying the heart. Briarwood was tied to everything, to the land, the creatures, the very soul of the forest. Just severing the heart didn't kill it completely. It's not dead, Mark. It's wounded." She felt the weight of her words settle into the room. A tense silence stretched between them, thick and suffocating. In that silence, the feeling that had been gnawing at Emma since they entered the lodge began to intensify. The feeling that something was still there, just beneath the surface. Sarah broke the silence, her voice small but sharp with fear. "What do we do now, Emma? We've done everything. We've fought the heart. We destroyed it, but if it's not gone, then what?" "We need to finish it," Emma said quietly. "We need to go deeper, find what's left. The heart was just the anchor, but there's more. Briarwood is still part of this land, and as long as it remains, it will be a threat." "But how?" Mark asked. "What more can we do? How do we even find what's left?" "I don't know yet," Emma said, her voice distant as she thought through their options. "But we can't just leave it like this. We have to end it completely. We're too deep in now. The only way to truly break Briarwood's hold is to go back to the source." She felt it then, the pull. It was faint at first, like a whisper in the wind, but it was undeniable. The forest, the land, the very earth beneath her feet, it was calling to her. It was calling to all of them. "I think we need to go back," she said slowly, her voice distant. "We need to go to the center of Briarwood, not just the heart, the place where the curse was born." Mark and Sarah exchanged uneasy glances, but neither spoke. They had seen the horrors Briarwood could bring, the things that lurked just out of sight, the creatures and shadows that seemed to follow them even now. But Emma's resolve was unwavering. She knew they had no choice. The forest wouldn't let them go, not unless they finished what they had started. It wasn't over. "What if it's too late?" Sarah asked quietly, her voice thick with fear. "What if it's already too far gone? What if we can't fix it? What if Briarwood is already beyond us?" "We have to try," Emma replied, her voice steady now. If we don't, it will keep feeding, it will keep growing, and it will consume everything. This isn't just about us anymore. It's about everyone who comes after us. Briarwood won't stop, not unless we make sure it's truly gone. Mark, after a long pause, nodded. All right. His voice was quieter than usual, but there was a determination in his eyes that Emma hadn't seen before. Let's finish it. The tension in the room seemed to ease just slightly, but it was replaced by something darker, something colder, anticipation. They had been through hell already, and now, with Briarwood's curse still lingering, they knew the final chapter of this nightmare was still ahead of them. It wasn't over, and it wouldn't be until they had finally freed the land. The night pressed in on them with a heaviness that felt unnatural, as though the darkness itself had weight. The fire in the lodge's hearth was reduced to little more than a sputtering glow, barely illuminating the room, casting long twisted shadows against the wooden walls. Despite the fire's warmth, a chill seemed to hang in the air, creeping beneath their skin, clinging to the back of their minds. Emma stood at the window again, her face reflected in the glass as she watched the trees sway in the wind, the forest beyond seemingly alive with secrets, with eyes that followed their every movement. Briarwood might have lost its heart, but something remained, something old, something hungry, buried deep within the land itself. She knew they had no choice but to go deeper, to face the true source of the curse. The forest wouldn't let them be until they did. They had awakened it, broken its heart, and in doing so, set loose the very thing that had fed its dark hunger. Briarwood was not a place, it was an entity. It wasn't just made of trees and earth. It was made of fear, of loss, of the people who had been consumed by it, left to wander the woods forever. And now, Emma was beginning to understand just how deep the connection went. She turned back to the others, who were still huddled near the fireplace. Mark had taken the lead before, but now he was pacing, his face drawn and pale, his movements jittery, as if the weight of the night had begun to catch up with him. "We need to go," Emma said quietly, her voice cutting through the silence that had settled between them. "We can't wait here. Briarwood's not done with us yet." Sarah met her gaze, her eyes filled with uncertainty but also something else. Fear, yes, but something deeper, something Emma recognized, the desperate need to find closure. The need to destroy what had held them here, what had haunted them. "I know," Sarah whispered. "But how do we even get there? The heart is destroyed. The curse should be broken, right?" Mark shook his head, his eyes shadowed with a dark understanding. "It's not enough. You said it yourself, Emma. Briarwood is not just the heart. It's the land, the trees, the very air we breathe here. It's an old magic, a deep magic. We've severed the bond that anchored it, but the curse is still here. The land, it's alive with it. And if we don't finish it now, it'll never stop." Emma felt the weight of his words, heavy as a stone. There was truth in them, an unsettling truth. Briarwood was not something that could be easily undone. The land had been corrupted for too long, and even though they had destroyed the heart, the forest itself was still watching, still hungry. "We need to go to the hollow," Emma said suddenly, her voice growing stronger as she spoke. The idea had been forming in her mind ever since they had broken the heart, but it had only now solidified into a singular, undeniable truth. It's where it all started. The hollow is the source of Briarwood's power, the place where the curse was first born. If we're going to stop this once and for all, that's where we need to go. "The hollow?" Mark repeated, confusion evident on his face. "I've never heard of it. Where is it?" Sarah looked up at Emma, her expression wary. "The hollow, what is it? Some kind of secret place?" "It's more than that," Emma said. Her voice was distant now, almost lost in her own thoughts as she pieced together the final parts of their journey. "The hollow is a place hidden deep in the forest, beyond the altar, beyond the clearing. It's where the first rituals were performed, the ones that bound Briarwood, the ones that anchored its curse to the land. The hollow is where the land was scarred, where the magic was born. It's the heart of the curse in a way that even the orb can't touch." She felt a shiver run through her, remembering the whispers, the dark legends that had surrounded the place. The hollow had been sealed away for centuries, hidden from the eyes of those who came to Briarwood. But it wasn't gone. The curse had bled from it into the forest, and the forest had fed on it. Mark shook his head again. "So we're supposed to go into the deepest part of the forest? The one place that's been kept secret for all these years? And we're supposed to what? Destroy it?" "Yes," Emma said, her voice quiet but resolute. "We destroy what's left of Briarwood's power. If we don't, it will keep feeding and it will keep growing. The curse is still alive, still rooted in this place. We have to finish it." Mark's eyes narrowed. "And you're sure this will work?" I'm sure we have no other choice, Emma said. The hollow is the last place we need to go. It's the core of everything that's been twisted here. If we can reach it and destroy what's left, we can finally break the curse. For good. For a long moment, there was only silence. Then Mark nodded slowly, his face grim but determined. All right, let's do it. No more running. Sarah, too, gave a quiet nod, though her face was pale. I just hope we don't make things worse. Emma's gaze moved to the door, her mind already set on the path ahead. If we don't try, we'll never know. And Briarwood will never stop. The journey back into the forest was different from the one they had taken earlier that night. It felt quieter, somehow more oppressive. The air seemed to weigh heavier on them, pressing down with an unseen force. The rain had stopped, but the fog that clung to the ground had thickened, curling around their legs like an old, cold hand. The trees, which had once seemed so alive with menace, now felt even more still, as if the forest itself was holding its breath, waiting for them to take the next step. The path to the hollow was not a well-marked one. Emma had only heard fragments of stories from her grandmother, snippets of legend whispered from the older generations, and her own hazy memories of childhood warnings. It was a place that was avoided, a place that had been abandoned by those who once lived here, those who had first tried to control Briarwood's power. But now it was their only hope. The woods seemed to close in around them as they ventured deeper, the trees growing taller and thicker, their gnarled limbs reaching out like skeletal arms. The wind had died down, but there was still something unnatural in the air, a quiet hum, a vibration in the earth beneath their feet, as if the land itself was alive with energy, waiting for something. The path was narrow, winding through the dense undergrowth, and as they moved forward, Emma could feel it, the pull. It was faint at first, like a whisper in the back of her mind, but it grew stronger with every step. She felt it in her bones, in the pit of her stomach. The hollow was close. She could feel it calling to her, just as it had called to those who had once come here, seeking power, seeking to control the land. And as they pushed through the thicket of brambles and vines, the trees seemed to part, revealing an opening, a clearing, but not like the one they had seen before. This one was darker, quieter. The air was thick, heavy with the scent of decay, of earth and moss, and something far older, something that had festered for centuries. At the center of the clearing, there was a large, twisted tree. Its roots were exposed, wrapping around a dark, jagged stone. The stone pulsed faintly, as if something was buried deep within it, something that was still alive. The hollow. Emma could feel it now, the very heart of Briarwood's curse, beating beneath her feet. This is it, she whispered, her voice barely audible. This is where it all started. And as she stepped forward, she knew this would be the place where it all ended. The clearing was suffocating, the air thick with an ancient energy that seemed to hum beneath the soil. The trees surrounding the hollow were massive, their trunks twisted into shapes that defied nature, their roots sprawling out like monstrous veins in the earth. The ground beneath Emma's feet felt softer than usual, almost sponge-like, as if it had absorbed centuries of darkness, of sorrow, of a curse that had never truly been lifted. The stone at the center of the clearing was impossibly old, its surface darkened with age, worn smooth in places by the passage of time. But it was not just the stone that held Emma's gaze. It was what lay buried beneath it, a sense of something waiting. The air around it felt alive, charged, like the earth itself was holding its breath, waiting for them to act. The wind had died down again, but the silence felt more unnatural than ever. The only sound was the soft rustle of their footsteps in the undergrowth. This is it, Emma whispered again, almost to herself. The weight of the words settled over her like a heavy cloak. The hollow wasn't just a place, it was the source. The very foundation of everything that had plagued this forest. This was where the curse had taken root, and this was where it had to end. Mark, his face pale and drawn, took a step forward, his eyes flicking nervously between the stone and the twisted tree. What do we do now? How do we? We destroy it, Emma said, her voice firm, though her heart was pounding in her chest. We destroy whatever is left of Briarwood's power. Whatever is keeping this curse alive. Mark nodded but didn't move. His gaze was fixed on the stone, a mixture of fear and awe in his eyes. Sarah was beside him, her face pale, her expression blank, as if she was trying to process the enormity of what they had just stepped into. Emma felt it too, the enormity of the moment. They had been through so much already, fought against Briarwood's heart, battled its shadows, but this place, this was where it all began, and it was where it would all end. The feeling in the air was palpable now, a sickening pulse that seemed to radiate from the stone, wrapping around her, pulling her toward it. It was as if the curse had a life of its own, something that wasn't quite human, something ancient and primal. We need to get closer, Emma said, taking a step forward. The ground squelched beneath her boots as she approached the stone. The others followed her, their steps hesitant, but there was no turning back now. As they neared the stone, Emma felt a sudden, sharp tug in her chest. A whisper of something dark, something familiar. It was like the pulse of the forest had reached into her very being, like the roots of briarwood had taken root in her soul. She staggered but caught herself on the stone's edge, her fingers brushing against the cold, slick surface. The moment she touched it, the ground trembled. A low, guttural hum filled the air, vibrating in her bones, a sound so deep it felt like it was coming from the earth itself. The trees groaned and cracked as if in response. "You should not be here," a voice rumbled from the stone. It was not a voice exactly, it was a presence, something that resonated deep within Emma's chest, like an echo in the marrow of her bones. "You cannot destroy me." The voice was not human. It was something else, something ancient, something that had lived in the roots of briarwood for centuries, feeding on the land, feeding on the fear and the despair of those who had fallen into its grasp. Emma froze, her heart hammering, the words sinking into her mind like poison. The presence was not just briarwood, it was the land, the forest, the curse itself, and it was aware of them. "You're wrong," Emma said, though her voice wavered slightly. "We can destroy you. We already destroyed your heart. We already killed what held you here. We'll finish it. We'll free this land." The voice laughed, low and hollow, vibrating in the air like a wind passing through ancient trees. "You think you can kill me?" it crooned. "You cannot destroy what you do not understand. You are mine. All of you are mine." Emma's hands clenched into fists. The ground was still shaking, and she could feel something beneath the stone, pulsing with dark energy, as if the land itself was thrumming with malice. The hollow was alive. The stone was not just a monument to the curse, it was a vessel, a prison, and something deeper. Something that could not be broken so easily. "We don't need to understand it," Emma replied, her voice stronger now. "We just need to end it." With that, she stepped forward, placing both hands flat against the stone. As her fingers made contact, the earth trembled violently, and the stone beneath her palms began to crack. A loud crunching noise filled the air, and for a moment, it felt like the very ground was splitting apart. The pulse of energy from beneath the stone intensified, like a heartbeat, like something ancient waking from a deep slumber. Suddenly, the ground erupted with a violent roar, sending a shockwave through the clearing. A massive crack shot through the stone, splitting it open from top to bottom. The air grew thick with the scent of damp earth, the smell of something rotten, and the shadows around them seemed to grow longer, more twisted. The trees groaned again, their branches creaking under some invisible weight. From the crack in the stone, something began to rise. At first, it was just a sliver of darkness, an inky blackness seeping out from the crack like liquid shadow. Then it grew, widening, stretching as if the stone itself were being consumed. The shadows began to take shape, forming into a figure tall and massive, but no shape could be truly made out. It was like staring at the darkness itself. A creature formed of shadow and night, its form both solid and fluid, shifting in the dim light. It was like a part of the forest had been summoned, a nightmare made flesh. "You think you can kill me?" the voice echoed, this time from within the very creature that had emerged from the stone. It was deep, guttural, and filled with an unnatural power. The creature's form began to solidify, its features becoming clearer. A towering, monstrous figure, its face a twisted amalgamation of branches, roots, and gnarled bark, its eyes glowing like fiery embers. It was no longer just a curse. It was briarwood itself, manifest. The creature reached out with its massive arms, long, spindly fingers twisting like tree roots as they reached toward Emma and the others. "We will destroy you," Emma said, taking a step back but standing her ground. "We've already broken your heart, and now we're going to break you." Mark stepped forward, his face set with determination. "We're ending this once and for all." The creature's laugh was a deafening roar, filling the clearing and vibrating through their very bones. "You cannot stop me. I am the land. I am briarwood. You are only shadows in my forest." But Emma wasn't listening. She had seen enough, felt enough to know that this moment, this battle, would define everything. The curse had spread through briarwood for centuries, feeding on fear, on despair, on those who had stumbled into its grasp. It had lived in the very earth, the roots, the trees, the land. And it was here now in front of them. The true source, the embodiment of briarwood's hunger. "This is where you die," Emma said, her voice cold and certain. With that, she turned and grabbed the torch Mark had carried into the forest. As the creature lunged toward them, Emma thrust the fire into the ground, plunging the flame deep into the earth, into the roots beneath. She knew what she had to do. The heart of Briarwood had been destroyed, but the land still carried the curse, buried deep within. The fire was the key, the one thing that could break the magic. The earth around them erupted, a blinding, searing light enveloping the clearing. The creature screamed, its form collapsing into a heap of ash and smoke as the flames spread like wildfire, consuming the roots of Briarwood, burning away the very magic that had kept it alive for so long. The forest shuddered as if it too was gasping for breath, struggling to let go of the curse that had bound it for centuries. And as the fire consumed the darkness, Emma knew that at last they had done it. Briarwood was finished. The forest screamed. The fire that had ignited beneath the earth, fed by Emma's desperate actions, roared upward like a living thing, its flames dancing with unnatural ferocity. It spread quickly, igniting the roots of the trees, tearing through the ground, consuming everything in its path. The air crackled with heat, thick with the scent of burning wood and the earthy tang of charred soil. The creature, the manifestation of Briarwood itself, was consumed in moments, its form disintegrating into black ash that was swept away by the intense wind that followed the fire's spread. Emma, Mark, and Sarah stood motionless, their eyes wide, locked onto the spectacle before them. The fire wasn't just burning the forest, it was changing it. The land was shifting, the very earth beneath their feet trembling as though it were awakening from a long, oppressive sleep. The trees creaked and groaned, their massive limbs twisting and snapping under the heat, while the ground beneath them buckled in violent waves, cracking open like an ancient tomb. And then, with an explosive shockwave, the land seemed to give way, splitting open along the clearing, the very earth shuddering as though it were shedding the last remnants of the curse that had plagued it for so long. The fire continued to spread, its light blinding in its intensity, but it wasn't just destroying Briarwood, it was cleansing it. As the flames roared, the oppressive weight that had hung over the land for centuries began to lift. The dark energy that had once been suffused in every root, every tree, every gust of wind was being burned away, consumed by the flames that danced like wild spirits across the forest floor. "We did it," Mark whispered, his voice almost lost in the roaring wind. His eyes were wide, but there was no joy in his expression, only the haunted look of someone who had just seen something far darker than they had ever imagined. "We actually did it." Sarah, standing close beside him, shook her head, her face pale as she looked around the clearing. The fire illuminated her face, casting flickering shadows in her eyes. "Is it really over, Emma? Is it really finished?" Emma didn't answer immediately. She was too lost in the sight before her. The fire was consuming everything, burning away not just Briarwood's twisted heart, but the very roots of the curse that had taken hold of the land. And yet, beneath the destruction, beneath the flickering orange and red flames, she could sense something else, something lingering, something old but different. The fire was purging the dark magic, yes, but it wasn't just cleansing the land, it was reawakening it, reshaping it. The trees around them, the roots buried deep beneath the earth, were shifting. Slowly, imperceptibly at first, but Emma could feel it. The forest was alive, truly alive now. It wasn't the twisted, unnatural thing that it had been before. The curse was gone. But something else had taken its place. Something purer, something that hadn't been seen for centuries. The fire was not just destruction, it was rebirth. With each passing moment, the forest seemed to change. The trees straightened, their twisted forms slowly relaxing, their branches no longer gnarled and blackened. The ground itself trembled beneath their feet, and Emma could feel a steady pulse, life, beneath the surface, beating, steady and rhythmic like a heart. And then, as suddenly as it had started, the flames began to die down. The wind that had swept through the forest slowed, the roar of the fire becoming a mere whisper in the distance. The light of the flames dimmed, and in the silence that followed, Emma felt the air grow heavy once again, but this time it was different. It wasn't the oppressive weight of a curse that had hung over them, it was something new. For the first time since they had arrived in Briarwood, the forest felt peaceful. Emma took a cautious step forward, her heart still pounding in her chest. She looked around, her eyes scanning the clearing. The fire had burned away the twisted trees, the dark shadows, and the unnatural forces that had once plagued the land. In their place, something new was growing, something fresh, something that felt alive. "I don't understand," Sarah said, her voice almost a whisper. "What happened? Was that supposed to happen? Is this Briarwood?" "No," Emma said, her voice filled with awe. "This is something else. Briarwood is gone. This is a new beginning." Mark stepped forward, his face softening as he looked around at the change. It's like the land is breathing again. It's alive. And Emma nodded. She felt the pulse beneath her feet, the rhythm of life, real life, returning to the earth. The fire had done more than burn the curse away. It had allowed the forest to heal. She knelt down on the ground, her fingers brushing the cool, damp earth. The soil was rich and soft now, no longer tainted with the blackened poison that had once soaked through it. It felt different, alive in a way that hadn't been possible for centuries. As she touched the earth, she felt the forest reach out to her, a whisper in the back of her mind, a sensation that ran through her like a gentle current. It was as if the land was thanking her, as if the very soul of Briarwood had been released from the curse that had held it captive for so long. The silence that followed was not oppressive, it was peaceful. And in that silence, Emma knew, deep in her heart, that they had done what no one else could. They had freed the forest. But as the forest slowly began to heal, Emma knew that the journey wasn't quite over. The curse was gone, yes, but the scars remained. Briarwood would never be the same, and neither would they. The memories of what had happened would stay with them, but they had changed something deeper, something that couldn't be undone. They had brought an end to something that had haunted the land for generations, and in its place they had given Briarwood the chance to grow again, to live again. "I think it's done," Sarah said quietly, her voice filled with wonder. "I think it's really over." Mark looked down at the ground, his eyes narrowing in thought. "It's over," he agreed softly, "but it's different now. The forest, it's alive. I can feel it." Emma stood slowly, her heart still racing, and turned to face the two of them. She could feel the change in the air, the way the forest had shifted, but she knew there was still one more thing they had to do. "Let's go," Emma said, her voice steady but filled with quiet triumph. "It's done. Briarwood is no longer a curse. It's a part of something new now. We've freed it. It's time to go home." With one last glance at the still smoking clearing, Emma turned and began to walk back toward the path, her footsteps firm. Mark and Sarah followed, their faces filled with the same quiet wonder, the same sense of finality. As they walked, the air around them felt lighter. The heavy weight of the curse was gone. The night was still, but it was no longer oppressive. It was peaceful. The trees, their branches no longer twisted in dark shapes, swayed gently in the breeze, and the sounds of life, real life, began to return. Briarwood had been freed, and as they made their way through the forest, the world around them seemed to hum with a new kind of life. The land had been scarred, but now it was healing. The curse was gone. And with that, the hollow had finally been silenced. As Emma, Mark, and Sarah continued their journey through the forest, they could feel the transformation in the air, subtle but undeniable. It wasn't just the absence of the dark energy that had once hung like a shadow over the land, it was the presence of something else, something new. The trees, now standing tall and straight, seemed to breathe with life. Their once twisted branches had softened, stretching towards the sky, their leaves shimmering with a deep green that felt almost otherworldly. It was as though the entire forest had taken a deep, steady breath and was now exhaling in relief, free at last from the weight of the curse that had held it captive for centuries. The air itself felt cleaner, fresher, like rain had washed it all away. Sarah, walking slightly ahead, paused and turned back, her eyes wide. "Emma, do you feel that?" Her voice was soft, almost reverent, as though speaking too loudly might shatter the fragile peace that had settled over the forest. "The forest, it's different. It's like, I don't know, like it's alive in a way it never was before." Emma didn't answer immediately. She too could feel it, the pulse beneath her feet, the subtle vibrations in the air, the way the land seemed to hum with the faintest trace of something powerful, something good. The curse was gone, but Briarwood had awakened into something else. She couldn't quite place it, but it was as though the forest had been held back from its true potential for so long, imprisoned by its own twisted history, and now it was finally free to grow, to be. Mark caught up with them, his face thoughtful, his brow furrowed. "It's almost like," he trailed off, his words hanging in the air, unfinished. But Emma knew what he meant. It was almost as if they had awakened something in the land, something that had been slumbering for centuries. "Yeah," Emma replied, her voice calm but filled with a quiet awe. "It's like Briarwood was holding its breath, waiting for something. For us, I guess." As they walked further into the heart of the forest, the path beneath their feet began to shift. The ground was no longer the soft, sponge-like earth it had been before, filled with decay. Now it was firm, solid, like the forest was rediscovering its strength, its foundation. The trees had thickened, their roots spread deep into the soil, connecting the land in a way Emma had never felt before. The silence, which had once been oppressive, was now peaceful, even soothing. It was the kind of silence you'd find in a place that was no longer hiding, no longer afraid. And yet, despite the calm, there was a subtle tension in the air, an awareness. Emma knew that while the curse had been broken, the forest would not be the same again. It couldn't be. It had been shaped by its dark past, and though it was healing, the scars would remain. But those scars, she realized, were not something to be feared. They were reminders of the battle that had been fought here, the struggle to reclaim the land from the darkness that had sought to consume it. "How do you feel?" Sarah asked quietly, glancing at Emma. Her voice was softer now, tinged with something like wonder, but also fear. Do you think we'll ever be able to really leave Briarwood behind? I mean, it's over, right? But Emma stopped walking and turned to face her. She met Sarah's eyes, feeling the weight of the question settle deep in her chest. She didn't have all the answers, but she knew this much. We've done everything we could. The curse is gone. Briarwood has been freed, and we've broken its hold on the land. But it will always be here in some way. It's part of us now, part of what we've been through. The forest may have healed, but the memories, the lessons we've learned, they're not going anywhere. Mark nodded, his expression distant. The forest will never be the same. But maybe that's a good thing. Maybe it can finally be what it was always meant to be. They fell into silence again, each of them lost in their own thoughts, the sound of their footsteps the only noise in the vastness of the forest. The further they walked, the more the path began to shift, becoming less defined, less structured. The trees grew more scattered, the underbrush thickened, and the feeling of the forest deepening, becoming wilder, grew stronger. The air around them was charged with a different kind of energy now, like the very earth was alive, awakening. "I don't like the way this feels," Sarah said suddenly, her voice low. "It's like we're leaving the safety behind, like we're walking into something new, something we don't understand." Emma paused, her gaze shifting to the dense woods around them. The feeling Sarah described was becoming more apparent now, the sensation that they were no longer walking in a familiar place. Briarwood had always been a place of shadows, of whispers, of hidden dangers. But now it was different. It wasn't just the land they had fought to free, it was something more, something raw, untamed. "It's not the same place anymore," Emma said quietly. "It's like the land is finding its balance again, but it's still growing." As they ventured further into the heart of the forest, the trees grew taller and the underbrush thicker, the path less discernible. The air became warmer, and the faint scent of flowers, of life, began to mingle with the earth's aroma, sweet and fresh. But it was also different. There was something wild in the air, something untamed. A pulse. A hum. It was as though the forest itself was reaching out, calling to them, urging them deeper. They came to a clearing, larger than any they had passed through so far. It was completely different from the first clearing, the one where they had destroyed the heart of Briarwood. This one was alive. The trees here were older, their bark smooth and pale, their leaves shimmering with an ethereal glow, as if they were bathed in moonlight, even though the moon was still hidden behind a thick layer of clouds. The ground was firm but soft, like a carpet of moss, and the air shimmered with the faintest trace of magic. Emma could feel it deep in her chest. This was no ordinary part of the forest. This was something new, something that hadn't been seen for centuries. "Emma?" Mark's voice was barely above a whisper. "Do you feel that?" She nodded slowly, her breath catching in her throat. "It's different here. It's like the forest is alive. Really alive." Sarah took a hesitant step forward, her eyes wide. "What is this place?" Emma didn't have an answer. She felt as if they had stumbled upon something they weren't meant to find, something ancient, something far beyond their understanding. Briarwood had been a place of darkness, of corruption, but here was something pure, something untouched by the curse. This was the forest in its truest form, before it had been tainted by human greed, before the curse had taken root. "This is a sanctuary," Emma whispered, as if the words had come to her in a sudden, clear revelation. "It's a place of balance, of life." They stepped into the clearing, and as they did, the trees seemed to bow toward them, their branches swaying in an unseen breeze. The ground beneath their feet felt alive, as if the very earth was calling to them, welcoming them. The air shimmered with energy, charged with an ancient magic, magic that had never been lost, only buried beneath the curse. And in the center of the clearing, standing alone, was a stone altar, much like the one they had seen earlier, though this one was untouched, whole, and radiating a faint, gentle glow. The stone was smooth, its surface unmarked, its shape flawless. It looked alive, as though it had been shaped by forces far beyond human hands. "This is the heart of Briarwood," Emma said quietly, her voice filled with awe. This is where it all began. The true source of the forest's power. Sarah looked around, her expression filled with wonder. But it's not like the heart we destroyed. This feels different. It is different, Emma said, stepping forward to the altar, her hand reaching out. This is what Briarwood was meant to be, before it became twisted. She placed her hand gently on the stone, and the moment her fingers made contact, a rush of energy flooded through her, warm, pure, and alive. It was as if the entire forest had exhaled in relief, as if the land itself had finally found its place, its purpose. This was not the darkness that had corrupted Briarwood. This was the magic of the land, the magic of the forest, the magic of life. And with that, Emma knew that Briarwood was no longer a place of evil, no longer a place to fear. It had been reborn, a place of balance, a place of peace, a place that would grow and flourish in its own time. The curse was gone. The forest had been freed. And now it was time for the forest to live. The energy from the altar surged through Emma like a river of light, a bright, radiant warmth that enveloped her whole being. It was unlike anything she had ever felt before, pure, untethered, and alive. The moment her fingers brushed the surface of the stone, she felt the land's heartbeat, a steady, ancient rhythm that resonated in her chest. It wasn't a sensation of power, but of life, raw and unfiltered, the true essence of Briarwood, untainted by the curse, uncorrupted by the darkness that had once ruled it. She pulled her hand away slowly, a soft gasp escaping her lips as the last traces of the magic left her skin. She stood there for a long moment, staring at the altar, her heart pounding, her thoughts swirling. This was the place where it all had begun. This was the true heart of Briarwood. The place where the forest had always been meant to thrive, before it had been warped into something monstrous by greed, by rituals that had sought to control it. But now it was free. Mark and Sarah had approached cautiously, sensing the change in the air, the new pulse of life that hummed within the clearing. The stones beneath their feet seemed to glow faintly, as though reacting to their presence, as though the very ground beneath them was awakening from a long slumber. "You feel it too, don't you?" Mark asked, his voice barely above a whisper. His eyes were wide, his expression filled with awe and disbelief. "It's like the forest is speaking to us. Not with words, but with energy." Sarah nodded, her gaze fixed on the altar. "It's incredible. It's like the forest is breathing again, growing again. There's a power here." Emma didn't know how to respond. There were no words to describe what they were experiencing, no language that could encapsulate the depth of the change in the air. The energy was tangible now, not something that could be touched with hands, but something that could be felt, something primal, something elemental. The very air felt alive, saturated with the essence of the forest spirit. "I think it's time we go," Sarah said suddenly, her voice pulling Emma from her thoughts. "This place, it feels like it's done, like it's found its balance, its purpose. But it's not for us anymore." Emma nodded slowly. She could feel it too. The forest was healing, but the time for their presence here had passed. Briarwood was no longer a place of shadows or twisted magic. It was a place of life. It was no longer something to be feared. It was a part of the natural world, a living, breathing entity that had finally found its equilibrium. And they had played their part. But now, it was time for the forest to take its place in the world once again, to return to the wild, to grow and change in its own time. But before they turned to leave, Emma's eyes were drawn to something at the edge of the clearing, something that she hadn't noticed before. There, nestled among the roots of the largest tree, was a small, delicate sapling. The leaves were a deep, vibrant green, and the trunk was thin and fragile, like a newborn's first steps. It was not like the twisted, gnarled trees that had once stood in Briarwood. This sapling was pure, untouched by the curse, its growth unhampered by the darkness that had once stifled it. Without thinking, Emma stepped closer, her eyes transfixed by the sight. She knelt down beside the sapling, her fingers brushing against the tender leaves, feeling their softness beneath her touch. The moment she did, a gentle pulse of energy surged through her again, this time smaller, more contained, but just as powerful. It was as if the forest had gifted her a piece of itself, a promise that it would grow, that it would thrive, that it would continue on, even after the curse had been destroyed. "This," Emma whispered to herself, more in awe than anything else, "is the future of Briarwood." Mark and Sarah stepped closer, their faces filled with the same reverence Emma felt. The sapling seemed to glow faintly in the dim light, its presence so pure, so full of promise that it almost seemed impossible. This tiny, fragile tree was not just a symbol of rebirth, it was the future of Briarwood. The forest had not just been freed from its curse, it had begun to regrow, to heal itself. This sapling was its first step, its first breath. It's a new beginning, Mark said softly, his voice filled with wonder. Sarah nodded, a small smile crossing her lips. Briarwood's heart may have been broken, but now it's whole again. It's alive. For a long moment, no one spoke. They simply stood there, staring at the sapling, feeling the magic in the air, the sense of growth, of new beginnings. Emma felt it deep within her, the realization that Briarwood was no longer a place of nightmares, but a place of life, a place of growth. The curse had been eradicated, but in its place, the land was finding its way back to its natural rhythm, its natural order. Emma stood up, taking one last look at the small sapling before turning back to the others. "It's time to leave," she said quietly, her voice filled with the certainty of someone who had seen something extraordinary, someone who had witnessed the birth of something new. Briarwood will take care of itself now. They began to walk back toward the path that had led them into the heart of the forest. As they walked, Emma could feel the forest around them shift. The trees no longer seemed oppressive. The air no longer held the weight of darkness. Now the air was filled with the scent of earth, of fresh leaves, of life. The forest was no longer a labyrinth of fear and twisted roots. It was a place that was healing slowly but surely. The path they had taken was not one that would be forgotten. They had left their mark on Briarwood, but the forest was moving forward, taking its first steps toward recovery. As they made their way back through the forest, the mist had begun to lift. The moon, hidden behind clouds for so long, began to peek through, casting a soft silver glow on the path before them. The night had a new energy to it, one of calm, of quiet peace. It was as though the forest was breathing in rhythm with their steps. "We did it," Mark said quietly, breaking the silence that had settled between them. "We really did it." Emma nodded, her gaze fixed on the path ahead. "We didn't just defeat the curse," she said, her voice steady, filled with a quiet strength. "We gave Briarwood a chance to heal, a chance to grow again." They walked in silence for a while longer, the forest now behind them. And with each step, Emma felt the weight of what they had accomplished settle into her bones. They had not just destroyed something dark. They had reborn something beautiful. Something that would grow, something that would survive, something that would live far beyond them. And as the first light of dawn began to break over the horizon, Emma knew that Briarwood's journey had only just begun. They had witnessed the end of one story, but the forest had only just begun to write its own. The light from the rising sun began to filter through the trees, casting long, pale shadows across the path as Emma, Mark, and Sarah walked silently through the forest. The world around them felt different now, quieter, but it wasn't the silence of emptiness. It was a peaceful stillness, a calm that had been hard-won. The storm that had raged in the heart of Briarwood had finally passed, and in its wake, the land had been reborn, its roots reaching deep into the earth, pulling strength from the very core of the world. Emma felt the change in the air, the shift that had happened not just in the land but in her too. She had come to Briarwood expecting to fight, expecting to confront the worst the forest had to offer, and now it was over. But the journey had been more than just a battle of survival. It had been a test, a trial not just of their courage but of their ability to understand and connect with something ancient, something vast. The sapling was the proof of that. A new life, fragile but full of potential, a beacon of hope for a future that had been so darkened by the past. Emma had felt it the moment her fingers brushed the earth beneath it. The pulse of something ancient, something that had been sleeping for so long, waiting for the curse to be lifted, waiting for the land to be allowed to flourish once more. Mark and Sarah walked quietly beside her, each lost in their own thoughts, their faces reflecting the gravity of what they had experienced. The forest seemed to whisper around them, its sound softer now, no longer the menacing rustle of things hidden in the shadows, but the gentle murmur of life beginning to unfold once more. Birds called to each other in the branches, the wind sighed through the leaves, and the air itself felt alive with the energy of rebirth. Despite the serenity, Emma couldn't shake the sense that there was still much more to be understood. Briarwood had been freed, yes, but what about the larger world? The forest had its own rhythm now, its own heartbeat, but how would that interact with the world beyond? What would happen to the people who had come before them, the ones who had sought to control the forest, the ones who had used it for their own dark purposes? "We've done it," Mark said finally, his voice breaking the silence between them. He sounded exhausted, but there was a quiet pride in his words. "We really did it. We freed it." Emma nodded, but her mind was elsewhere, her thoughts lingering on the mysteries they had uncovered, on the layers of the land's history they had just begun to scratch the surface of. "But I wonder," she started, her voice trailing off, "what does Briarwood want now?" Sarah glanced over at her, her brow furrowing in confusion. What do you mean? It's free now. The curse is gone. I know, Emma said, her voice thoughtful. But the forest wasn't just cursed. It was controlled, manipulated. The people who lived here before, what did they want from Briarwood? What was their purpose? Mark stopped walking, his eyes narrowing in thought. You think the forest was just a victim in all this? It wasn't just the people, Emma. The land was complicit in what happened here. Briarwood wanted something. It fed off the darkness. It was connected to it. Emma looked at him, her mind racing with the possibilities. But what if it didn't choose that? What if it was something else entirely? A reaction to what was done to it? Sarah's voice interrupted their thoughts, filled with an urgency that made them both stop in their tracks. Whatever happened here, whatever the forest wanted, it's done now. The curse is broken. The forest is healing. We've given it a chance to grow again. I think it's time we let it. Her words hung in the air like a soft echo, a reminder that the forest was no longer the dark, twisted place it had once been. It was alive again, no longer burdened by the weight of centuries of sorrow and pain. The future of Briarwood was now in its own hands. Emma turned to face Sarah, her gaze steady. You're right. But that doesn't mean we can forget. We have to remember what happened here. We can't let the past repeat itself. Mark nodded, his face somber. We'll carry what we've learned with us. But it's not ours to control anymore. Briarwood has its own path now. We've set it free. They resumed walking, the sun now fully rising above the horizon, its golden light spilling through the trees, painting the forest in hues of orange and pink. It was a new day, a new chapter in the story of Briarwood. The land had been freed from its past, and it was now up to the forest itself to decide what kind of future it would have. As they walked, Emma couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. They had ended the curse, but Briarwood was far from done. She could feel the pulse of the land beneath her feet, the thrum of life that was just beginning to awaken, the energy that had always been there, hidden beneath the surface. This place, this forest, had a deep, ancient soul, and now that it was free from the shackles of the curse, it was ready to grow in ways none of them could truly understand. They made their way through the forest, the path winding and twisting, leading them deeper into the heart of the land. The trees that had once seemed so oppressive now stood tall and strong, their trunks wide and solid, their leaves rustling softly in the morning breeze. The forest felt alive, every inch of it pulsing with new energy, with new potential. The scent of pine, moss, and fresh earth filled the air, a fragrance so clean, so pure, that it seemed to cleanse Emma's very soul. In the distance, the sound of a river could be heard, the gentle rush of water over rocks, a soothing melody in the quiet stillness of the morning. It was a sound that reminded Emma of the passage of time, of the endless cycle of life, death, and rebirth. Briarwood was not dead. It was simply changing, like a river carving its way through rock, shaping the land over time. I think we've done everything we can here, Mark said, his voice soft, almost reluctant, as if he were saying goodbye to something precious. It's time to move on. Sarah nodded, but Emma could see the uncertainty in her eyes. The journey they had taken together had changed all of them in ways that were impossible to fully understand. They had fought the darkness, but now they were walking away from it, leaving Briarwood to find its own place in the world. It's strange, Sarah said, her voice quiet. After everything we've been through, I almost feel like we're walking away from a part of ourselves. I know what you mean, Emma replied, her voice soft but filled with quiet resolve. Briarwood will always be a part of us, but it's not our place to stay anymore. The forest is alive again. It doesn't need us anymore. Mark glanced back at the path they had traveled, his eyes lingering on the trees that stretched endlessly in every direction. Maybe it never really needed us in the first place. We were just here to help it remember what it was, what it's supposed to be. They walked on in silence, the light of the rising sun growing brighter, casting long shadows in the forest. The path ahead seemed endless, but there was a new clarity in the air, a sense of peace that hadn't been there before. Briarwood had been set free. It had been given a chance to grow, to heal, and to find its way back to its natural balance. But as they walked toward the edge of the forest, Emma couldn't help but wonder, what would happen now? What would the forest become? What kind of life would grow here now that the darkness had been driven out? And what would happen when others learned of Briarwood's true nature? For now, though, those questions would have to wait. For Emma, Mark, and Sarah, it was time to leave Briarwood behind. The forest had found its balance, and it was time for them to continue their own journeys, to move forward into a new world. And as they crossed the threshold of Briarwood, leaving the heart of the forest behind them, Emma felt a strange sense of closure. The forest was no longer a place of fear, it was a place of rebirth. And though their journey was over, Briarwood's story was just beginning. As they ventured further away from the heart of Briarwood, the forest gradually shifted, the towering trees thinning out and the dense underbrush becoming less oppressive. Yet, despite the noticeable change in the atmosphere, the air was lighter, less saturated with the heavy magic that had once lingered. The three of them could still sense a strange, lingering presence behind them, a kind of watchful silence, as if the forest was not quite finished with them. The path they had followed into the heart of Briarwood now seemed distant, almost foreign. They were leaving behind the place of shadows and nightmares, the place of ancient power that had been twisted and corrupted by greed and dark rituals. But now the forest had been freed, transformed into something new, something beautiful, a place of renewal. Yet, something in Emma's chest tightened as they walked on. She had thought they'd been finished with Briarwood, that the curse had been broken and the land set free. And in a way that was true. But she couldn't shake the feeling that something else, something deeper, was still calling to them, a force that had been lingering just beneath the surface of their journey, hidden by the forest's many layers of secrets. As the three of them made their way toward the forest's edge, the sounds of the trees, the birds, and the wind faded into a soft, almost imperceptible hum. The world around them became quieter, as if the forest itself was holding its breath. Even the sky above had changed. What had once been a dark, stormy expanse was now brightening into an early morning canvas of blues and purples, hues that shifted gently with the rising sun. The shadows of the past were being cast away, and light was beginning to return to the world. But still, Emma couldn't shake the feeling. That call. The sound was faint, like the rustling of leaves far off in the distance, but it was there, almost imperceptible, tugging at the edges of her awareness. It was a sound that seemed to echo through her bones, a whisper from deep within the earth, a pulse of energy that vibrated through her body like a string plucked in the dark. It was as though Briarwood was not finished with them at all, not yet. She stopped walking abruptly, causing Mark and Sarah to turn toward her in surprise. Her heart had begun to race, her mind swarming with thoughts she couldn't quite articulate. It was a gut feeling, an instinct she had learned to trust over the course of their journey through the forest. She could feel the ground beneath her feet trembling ever so slightly, as though the land itself was alive, breathing, waiting for something. "What's wrong?" Mark asked, his brow furrowed in concern. I don't know," Emma replied, her voice tight. "I think there's more to this than we understand. Briarwood isn't done. Not yet." Sarah stepped closer, her gaze scanning the woods around them. The trees here were different, softer, gentler, but they still carried a weight that was hard to shake. Even in the quiet of the morning, there was an undercurrent of something ancient, something powerful. "You're not saying we have to go back, are you?" "I don't know," Emma said, her voice uncertain. She looked back at the winding path they had followed out of the heart of Briarwood, her eyes lingering on the distant tree line. There was something there, just beyond the edge of the forest. Something that called to her, pulling at the very marrow of her bones. "But I think the forest still has something to show us. Something we haven't seen yet." Mark sighed, his expression tired but understanding. "We've been through so much already, Emma. I don't know if we can go back into that darkness. Not after what we've seen. Briarwood is free now. Isn't that enough?" Sarah crossed her arms, a skeptical look on her face. "Emma, you're not seriously considering going deeper into the forest, are you? We've broken the curse, we've freed it. Briarwood is healing. What else could there be?" Emma hesitated. She wasn't sure. There was no logical explanation for the feeling that had settled in her chest. But she couldn't ignore it. There was something hidden in the depths of Briarwood, something left unfinished. She had felt it the moment she had touched the altar, the pulse, the heartbeat of the land. And now, as the morning sunlight bathed the forest in its warmth, that pulse had returned, calling to her. "I don't know," she said quietly, "but I think it's calling to me. There's something we missed, something we need to understand." The silence that followed was thick, heavy, as the two of them processed her words. Mark's eyes flicked toward the forest, then back to Emma. He didn't say anything at first, but she could tell he was torn. He didn't want to face the darkness again, didn't want to return to the forest that had nearly consumed them. Yet Emma could see the flicker of curiosity in his eyes. Something deep inside him, just like her, was drawn to the mystery. Finally, he nodded slowly. "If you think there's something else, something important, we'll follow you. But we need to be careful. Briarwood is changing. It's not the place it once was, but there's no telling what's still out there." Sarah let out a frustrated sigh, but she stepped forward nonetheless, her tone softer. "All right, Emma. We'll stick together. But if we're going back, it's not without a plan. Emma nodded, feeling a sense of resolve settle in her chest. We'll stick together. But we have to be ready for anything. And with that, they turned around, making their way back toward the heart of Briarwood once more. The sun had fully risen now, and the forest was bathed in a soft, golden light, the shadows no longer oppressive but gentle and welcoming. The trees stood tall, their branches swaying lightly in the breeze. But beneath the beauty, Emma could still sense the pulse, faint but undeniable, reaching out to them, drawing them back. They walked in silence, each of them lost in their own thoughts. The deeper they moved into the forest, the more alive it felt. The air was thick with the scent of moss and pine, and the forest floor was soft beneath their feet. But it wasn't just the physical sensation that Emma noticed. There was a presence in the air, something intangible but all-consuming. It felt as if the entire forest was watching them, waiting for something. As they neared the place where they had encountered the altar, the ground beneath their feet began to tremble once more. It was subtle at first, just a slight vibration, but it grew steadily stronger with each passing step. Emma's pulse quickened and her breath caught in her throat. There was something else here, something hidden, waiting. Do you feel that? Mark asked quietly, his voice almost a whisper, as if speaking too loudly might shatter the fragile connection they were experiencing. I feel it, Emma replied, her voice tight with anticipation. It's like the forest is waking up. Something beneath it. Something deep. The tremors grew stronger, the ground beneath their feet shaking with an intensity that was impossible to ignore. The trees around them creaked, their branches twisting and groaning, and the wind began to pick up, whipping through the forest like a storm. Emma could hear it now, something distant, like a low, rumbling growl, emanating from deep within the earth. What is that? Sarah whispered, her voice trembling. Emma didn't answer. She was too focused on the sound. It wasn't a growl in the traditional sense. It was deeper than that, primal, an echo that seemed to come from the very heart of Briarwood. And then, with a force that shook the entire clearing, the ground split open. The earth trembled beneath their feet as the ground split open, sending tremors rippling through the clearing. For a moment, Emma, Mark, and Sarah stood frozen, unsure of whether they should run or stay and face whatever was happening. The forest around them seemed to hold its breath, as if anticipating something far more significant than the storm they had just witnessed. The trees, which had once seemed oppressive and dark, now seemed almost receptive, waiting for the next event, the next pulse. Emma's heart hammered in her chest as she took a step forward, unable to pull her eyes away from the crack that had appeared in the earth. The sound of cracking stone echoed through the air, followed by a deep, resonant rumble that seemed to originate from the heart of the forest itself. It wasn't an earthquake. This felt different, intentional, as though the very bones of Briarwood were shifting. Mark stepped beside her, his face pale but resolute. "What the hell is that?" he asked, his voice barely audible over the rumbling sound that reverberated through the ground. "I don't know," Emma replied, her voice shaking. "But it's coming from deep within the earth. It's like the forest itself is alive. And it's angry." Sarah, who had been standing several feet back, now joined them at the edge of the crack. She was staring at it with wide eyes, her lips trembling slightly as if she were seeing something that her mind could not comprehend. "It's not just angry. It's awakening." Suddenly, the crack in the earth widened, splitting the ground further apart as though something vast and powerful was pushing its way up from below. The trees surrounding the clearing shook violently, their branches swaying as if caught in a violent wind, though the air itself had grown still. The rumble grew louder, a low hum that pulsed through the very air, vibrating deep in their chests. Emma could feel it now. Something was awakening beneath them, something buried long ago, waiting for the moment when it could finally emerge. Mark took a step back, his face filled with fear. "Should we get out of here? This doesn't feel right. Whatever this is, it's not something we should be messing with." But Emma, though terrified, felt an irresistible pull toward the widening crack. It was like a magnetic force drawing her in. Her body was humming with energy, the air crackling around her as she stepped forward. She didn't understand why, she didn't even know what was beneath her feet, but she couldn't leave now. Not when the answers were so close. "No," she said, her voice trembling but firm. "We need to see this. We can't run. Briarwood is calling us. It wants us here." Sarah shook her head, a nervous laugh escaping her lips. "Briarwood is calling you maybe, but I don't want to know what's down there. This is madness." But Emma was already moving closer to the crack, the ground beneath her shifting as though the forest itself was shifting, making room for her, opening paths where there were none before. The deeper she walked into the clearing, the stronger the force became. She could feel the pulse, the heartbeat beneath her feet. It was slow, steady, but it was there, reverberating in the air. And it felt familiar. This was no mere natural disaster. This was something deliberate, something alive. The crack in the earth widened even further, revealing a massive, jagged opening in the ground, like the mouth of some giant cavern. The air grew colder, the smell of damp earth and ancient moss filling their lungs. The ground vibrated with an unsettling frequency, and from deep within the chasm, Emma thought she heard a voice, a low, almost inaudible whisper, carried on the wind. It wasn't a voice in the conventional sense. It was deeper, more primal, a sound that felt like it was coming from the very bones of the world itself. And then, with a great shudder, the ground beneath them cracked open fully. From the depths of the chasm rose a massive shape, dark, vast, and ancient, unfurling like the roots of an enormous tree or something far, far older. The air around them thickened, the forest seemingly holding its breath, as if witnessing something that had not occurred in centuries. The figure emerging from the chasm was covered in a strange, almost metallic-looking substance, dark and gleaming like ancient stone or the slick surface of some enormous creature. It was enormous, bigger than anything they had ever seen. Emma stood rooted to the spot, unable to tear her gaze away from the sight before her. The shape was shifting, morphing into something far more recognizable. A massive, skeletal form, resembling an ancient beast with impossibly long limbs and towering horns that twisted like branches from a great tree. Its eyes glowed faintly in the darkness, their color shifting between shades of gold and silver, as though they were forged from the stars themselves. The bones that made up its body cracked and groaned as it rose, the deep, resonant sound echoing throughout the forest. "This," Mark whispered, his voice barely audible, "this is impossible." Emma could feel it now, the true weight of the presence before them. This was no ordinary creature. It was something ancient, something born of the earth, perhaps even before the forest itself. It was something that had been sealed away, buried deep within the earth, waiting for the right moment to return. Briarwood had never been just a forest. It had been the guardian of something far older, something that had been hiding beneath its roots, protected by the very magic they had only just begun to understand. The creature's movements were slow but deliberate, its head tilting down toward them. Its eyes locked onto Emma, and for a moment, the forest around them seemed to dissolve. All that remained was the overwhelming presence of this ancient being, its gaze piercing deep into her soul. She felt an overwhelming sense of awe and terror. It was as if this being had existed far before humanity had even learned to walk, and yet here it was, rising from the earth after so long. This was the true heart of Briarwood. Briarwood is its prison, Emma whispered, her breath coming in ragged gasps. She understood now. The forest had been more than just a place of magic. It had been a shield, a barrier keeping this creature bound. And when the curse was lifted, when Briarwood had been freed, this being had awakened from its ancient slumber. The creature's voice echoed in the back of her mind, low, guttural, like a distant growl, but with a tone that resonated with Emma's very being, a sound that wasn't meant for the human ear. She felt the energy flow through her, like lightning surging through the air, a sharp crackle of power that filled every inch of her body. "You have released me," the voice reverberated in her mind, a language ancient and powerful, but she understood it nonetheless. "I have waited long for the world to return to its roots, and now it is time." Emma stumbled back, her legs weak, her mind reeling. The creature was no longer just a beast, it was something more, something primal, something older than time itself. Its eyes seemed to pierce through her soul, and in that moment, Emma realized the truth. Briarwood had never been a simple forest. It had been the vessel, the prison, and the protector of something far older, far more powerful. "We were wrong," Emma whispered, her voice trembling with a mixture of awe and fear. "This isn't just Briarwood. This is its heart." The creature's head dipped lower, its massive, skeletal form casting a shadow that seemed to swallow the clearing. Its voice rumbled again, louder this time, its tone almost like a promise. "Briarwood is only the beginning. The land will return to its true form, and with it, the world will change." Suddenly, the ground around them began to shake once more, but this time it was different. The earth seemed to pulse, like the heartbeat of the world was accelerating, rushing through the forest like a living entity. The trees shook, their leaves falling in torrents around them as if the forest itself was shedding its old skin. The ancient being rose further from the chasm, its form towering above the trees. The energy in the air crackled, and Emma could feel the immense power of the forest, of the earth itself, rising with it. Briarwood had been freed, but it was only the beginning of a much greater change. And Emma, standing at the precipice of it all, could only watch in awe as the true power of the forest began to unfurl. The air around them thickened, vibrating with an energy that pulsed through the ground, the trees, the very atmosphere. It was as if the entire forest had become alive, more alive than ever before. Every leaf, every branch, every stone seemed to hum with the same power that surged from the massive creature that now stood before them. It was no longer just the forest that had been awakened. It was the very essence of the earth itself, rising from its ancient slumber, a force that had been bound for eons, waiting for its time to return. The creature's skeletal form towered above them, its head high, its eyes glowing with an eerie, otherworldly light. Its body was an amalgamation of bone and stone, sinew and shadow, something that looked almost like a god of old, formed from the deep earth and the darkness of time. It was the embodiment of the ancient, the forgotten, the primordial. It had no name, no identity, no past, only a purpose: to awaken when Briarwood was freed, when the curse was lifted, when the land had once again returned to balance. And now, with the curse broken and the forest beginning its healing process, this being, this ancient force, was emerging to reclaim its place in the world. It was no longer just Briarwood that had been imprisoned. It was the very heart of the forest, the true spirit that had once bound the land together. Now it sought to rise, to stretch its influence across the world. Emma stood at the edge of the clearing, feeling the weight of the creature's gaze, her body trembling as the power in the air grew heavier with each passing second. She could feel the pull, the ancient force calling to her, connecting with something deep within her soul. It was like a thread had been woven between them, a bond that transcended time, space, and understanding. She wasn't sure if it was the creature reaching out to her, or if it was something else, something within her that had always been tied to the land. And yet, despite the terror and awe that gripped her, Emma couldn't pull away. She felt as though she was standing at the edge of an abyss, staring into the heart of something immense and unknowable. The pulse of energy was like a drumbeat in her chest, steady and powerful, and she could hear it growing louder as the creature's form shifted again, its bones cracking and groaning as though it were shaking off centuries of confinement. "We have to stop it," Sarah whispered, her voice sharp with panic, her hands shaking as she clutched the hem of her jacket. She stepped back instinctively, her eyes wide with fear. "This isn't right. This thing, it can't be allowed to." But Emma shook her head slowly, her voice calm, though inside she was trembling. "We can't stop it, Sarah. Not anymore. It's too late. Briarwood is more than just a forest. It's alive. It's a guardian of something older, something powerful, and it's awakening. The curse wasn't just a spell, it was a seal." Mark stepped forward, his expression conflicted. "So, what are you saying? We just let it rise? Let it take over?" Emma turned her gaze toward him, her eyes steady. "I don't know what it will do. But this isn't just about Briarwood anymore. This is bigger. It's about the land. The world." The earth trembled again, more violently this time, the ground cracking beneath them as the ancient being took another step forward. Its massive form shifted, limbs extending, growing ever larger as the roots of the trees around them twisted and writhed like serpents, reaching for the chasm from which the creature had emerged. The forest seemed to be feeding it, drawing strength from the land itself, from the core of the earth, as the trees bent toward it, their branches bowing in reverence. The entire forest was alive, every part of it connected to the creature in some way, as though it had been part of a larger, unknowable design all along. The whispers in Emma's mind grew louder now, more insistent. It wasn't just the creature's voice anymore, it was the forest itself, its thoughts, its desires, its needs. She could hear it, feel it, in the very marrow of her bones. It wasn't speaking directly to her, it was speaking to the land, to the world. And it was calling for the balance that had been disrupted, calling for its purpose to be fulfilled. "We were wrong," Emma whispered again, her voice a soft murmur carried on the wind. "This forest, this creature, it's not a curse. It's a guardian. It was never meant to harm the world. It was meant to protect it." Mark and Sarah exchanged uncertain glances, their fear palpable. "What do you mean?" Mark asked, his voice tight with disbelief. "Briarwood wasn't just keeping this creature locked away," Emma said, her eyes never leaving the massive form that towered before them. "It was keeping it safe, and it was keeping the world safe from it. This thing, this creature, it wasn't supposed to be unleashed. The curse wasn't just a mistake. It was the only thing holding this ancient force back." Sarah looked at Emma with confusion. "So what? We just let it do whatever it wants? We can't let it have the whole world." Emma closed her eyes for a moment, feeling the pulse of energy from the creature grow stronger, the whispers in her mind now unmistakable. She could feel the forest moving around her, its roots reaching, stretching into the very fabric of the world. She felt the power of it all, the ancient strength of the earth, the pulse of life, the beat of time itself. This was not just about Briarwood. It was the heartbeat of the planet, of nature itself, the force that governed the world. "I don't know if we can stop it," Emma said quietly, her voice filled with a mix of fear and awe. "But we have to understand it first. We have to figure out what it wants, because this is no longer just a battle. It's the land itself. It's alive." The ancient creature's voice reverberated again in the back of her mind, so strong now that she could almost feel it physically. It wasn't hostile. It wasn't threatening. It was unfamiliar, an intelligence that spanned far beyond human understanding. It was the spirit of the land, the guardian of nature's oldest secrets. "I have awakened," the voice whispered in her mind, its presence like a storm gathering on the horizon. "The world has forgotten what it is to be whole. It has forgotten its roots, its true purpose. The land has been fractured, corrupted by those who do not understand. But I will restore balance. I will remind the earth of its strength. The forest will grow again. Everything will grow again." The trees around them began to shake more violently, their trunks creaking as though they were alive, straining against the energy that surged from the creature. The roots of the trees wriggled like snakes, twisting and bending as they reached toward the chasm, feeding the creature's rise. "No," Sarah gasped, taking another step back. "This is too much. This isn't right. This isn't natural." Mark stepped forward, his face determined. "We can't fight this. We can't fight what we don't understand. But we can learn. We can try to help. If it wants balance, if it wants restoration, maybe that's something we can support." Emma nodded slowly, the fear in her heart slowly shifting to a cautious hope. Maybe we don't have to stop it. But we need to know what it wants before it's too late. We need to understand its balance." The creature's eyes turned toward Emma, and for a moment, time itself seemed to stop. Its glowing gaze pierced through her, and in that instant she knew it was waiting for her to understand. It was offering her a choice, an opportunity to connect, to learn the true purpose of the forest and its guardian. The earth rumbled beneath them once more as the creature began to stretch its long limbs, the sky darkening overhead as if in response to the power awakening. The balance of the world was shifting, and Emma felt herself caught in the very center of it. The power of Briarwood, the forest, the creature, was immense, and she realized with a chilling certainty. This was only the beginning. The air grew thick, charged with an intensity that Emma had never felt before. The creature's gaze never wavered, its eyes burning like molten gold, pinpricks of light in the darkening sky. It wasn't just a beast, not anymore. It was an entity, a being from a time before the world had been fractured, before civilization had risen and begun to reshape the earth to its will. It was not human, nor animal, nor even purely natural. It was something far more profound. And it was looking at her like she was a piece of a puzzle it had waited centuries to complete. The ground underfoot trembled again, the vibrations now too strong to ignore, rattling her bones with a deep, bone-shaking force. It was like standing on the edge of a great chasm, feeling the earth beneath you yawning open, ready to swallow everything in its path. But Emma remained still, her mind reeling, her body rooted to the spot by some invisible force. She had felt it the moment the creature's gaze met hers. The connection, a bond forged between them by the ancient power of the forest. It was as if the forest had been waiting for her, waiting for someone who could understand its true purpose, someone who could see past the fear and the darkness and recognize the heart of the forest, pulsing with life. It was Sarah's voice that cut through the thick air, shaking with fear and disbelief. "Emma, we can't let this happen. This thing, it's going to destroy everything." "I'm not sure it's going to destroy anything," Emma said, her voice steady despite the turmoil in her chest. Her eyes never left the creature, watching as it unfolded further from the chasm, its limbs stretching, its form shifting and warping as though the bones themselves were being remade. It was as though the earth itself was bending, reshaping itself around this being, and Emma could feel the immense power of it. She could feel the force of something older than anything she had ever known, something that existed before the world had been altered by human hands. "What do you mean?" Mark asked, his voice taut with unease. He stood next to her now, his eyes also locked on the creature, but there was something in his posture, something that spoke of a deep, primal fear. "You can't be serious. This thing has been locked away for a reason." "I know," Emma said softly, her mind struggling to process the flood of thoughts and feelings that coursed through her. But the curse wasn't just a trap for the creature. It was a prison for all of Briarwood, for everything in it. This creature isn't evil. It's the guardian of the forest, of the land. And now that the curse is broken, it's waking up. It's trying to restore balance to a world that's forgotten what that even means. Sarah shook her head, a frantic look crossing her face. Restore balance? Destroying everything. This isn't about balance. This is about power. And if it's as powerful as you're saying, we can't stop it. Emma's heart twisted in her chest at the truth of Sarah's words. She couldn't stop it. None of them could. But maybe that wasn't the point. Maybe their role in this was never to fight the creature or the forest. Maybe their role was to understand, to learn why this ancient being had been confined for so long, and why it had chosen now to awaken. What if it's not about destruction? Emma said, her voice quieter now as the weight of her words settled in. What if this creature is trying to save the world? Save it from the same mistakes that have been made over and over again? What if the earth is finally calling out for something to restore its balance? The rumble beneath their feet intensified, but this time, it wasn't a violent shaking. It was more like the quiet stirring of an immense, slumbering giant. The ancient being's form seemed to flicker and pulse, its skeletal body glowing faintly in the twilight. The air around them shimmered with energy, thick and heavy, as though the very fabric of reality was being rewritten, shifting and warping with every passing second. What if, Emma continued, her eyes distant, what if this is what we were meant to see? What if the forest, what if it chose us because we are the only ones who can help it, the only ones who can understand its purpose? The words hung in the air like a fog, thick and impenetrable, as though the creature itself were weighing them. Emma didn't know what she expected, but when the creature's gaze shifted to her again, she felt it, the final thread, the connection made. She could feel it in her chest, a deep pull, a presence within her. It wasn't just a creature, it was alive with the consciousness of the forest itself. Help me, the voice reverberated in her mind again, but this time, it wasn't distant. It was close. The presence was almost tangible. Help me remember. Help me restore what was lost. Sarah took a step back, her hand clutched tightly to Mark's sleeve. I don't understand. You think we should help this thing? You think we should let it destroy everything to restore balance? It'll wipe everything out. Emma shook her head slowly. It's not about destruction. It's about restoration. The earth is fractured. The land is sick, poisoned by the things we've done to it. It's not about killing humanity, it's about making the land whole again. It's about healing the broken places that we've left behind. The creature's eyes flickered, shifting in color like molten metal, and Emma felt it, the call, growing stronger now, its presence overwhelming like a tide rising. The wind picked up, swirling around them as the massive being's form began to solidify further, its vast limbs stretching above the trees. The very air seemed to grow thick with an ancient power, and Emma's pulse quickened, her breath coming faster as she felt the world itself shifting beneath her. We can't just stand here, Mark said, his voice trembling with the weight of the situation. If this thing is the heart of the forest, if it's the force behind all this, then we need to understand what it wants. But how do we stop it from going too far? Emma's gaze never wavered. She could feel the creature's energy swirling around her, pulling her toward it. She could hear the pulse of the forest, the heart of the land, beating in time with her own. We can't stop it, but maybe we can guide it, she said softly, almost to herself. Maybe that's what we're here for. Not to fight, but to understand. To help it find its way back. The creature's enormous form seemed to lower, its limbs shifting with a grace that belied its immense size. It bent toward Emma, its eyes narrowing as though it were studying her, understanding her. The pulse of energy in the air thickened, a deep hum that reverberated through her very bones. She could feel it now, the forest's rhythm, its heartbeat, its life force all around her. And then the voice came again, clearer this time, reverberating in her chest. Help me restore the balance. Help me awaken the earth once more. The words were not a demand. They were a plea. The creature's form trembled, and Emma realized in that moment what had been missing. The forest was calling for help, yes, but it was also waiting for them to become part of its restoration. The curse had been broken, but the true work was still to be done. Briarwood, the land, the world itself, everything had been changed, but there was no going back. There was only forward, only healing. She could feel it now, the weight of the responsibility. Briarwood's pulse was connected to her own. The forest wasn't just alive in a literal sense. It was alive in a way that spoke, reached, connected. This wasn't just about her or them. It was about the world, and about something far older, far deeper than anything they could comprehend. But maybe, just maybe, they had a chance to help. The weight of Emma's words hung heavy in the air, her breath quickening as the reality of what was unfolding before them sank in. The creature's presence, its ancient power, pressed down on them like the deepest of oceans, vast and unknowable. The entire forest seemed to hold its breath, every leaf, every branch, every pulse of the land reacting to the creature's awakening. It was as if the very world was aligned with its rise, as if this moment had been written into the earth itself, waiting for the right time, the right people, to unravel its truth. And in that moment, Emma understood. This wasn't just a battle of survival. This was something much more significant, something older. It was a reckoning. The forest, the earth, everything had been waiting, watching for this moment, when the curse would be lifted, when the barriers would fall, and when the true heart of Briarwood could finally emerge to restore what had been lost. The creature loomed before them, its skeletal form rippling with power, its long limbs extending toward the sky, as if reaching for the heavens themselves. Its enormous horns twisted like ancient roots, and its body, a blend of bone, stone, and shadow, seemed to merge with the very landscape around them, as if it were part of the earth, a living embodiment of nature's force. The earth beneath Emma's feet trembled again, but this time it wasn't just the ground. It was the air, the very fabric of existence itself, vibrating with energy, as if every atom was reacting to the presence of the creature. The wind began to whip through the trees, faster now, swirling around them with increasing intensity, yet strangely calm at the center, as if the forest was holding them in place, waiting. Sarah took a step back, her body tense with fear. Emma, this isn't just about Briarwood anymore. It's about the whole world. It's too much. Too powerful. It will destroy everything. Mark reached for her, his hand tightening on her shoulder as he looked at Emma. We need to stop it, Emma. We have to do something. But Emma stood rooted to the spot, the hum of the earth pulsing through her, filling her with a sense of urgency that she couldn't shake. Her heart raced as the creature's gaze locked with hers again, its golden eyes gleaming with an ancient intelligence, as if it recognized her, understood her. The connection was undeniable. It's not destruction, Emma said, her voice trembling but steady. It's restoration. This is the heart of the land, Mark. This creature, it's the spirit of the forest, the guardian of balance, is trying to restore the earth to what it was before it was corrupted, before everything changed. Sarah's eyes widened in disbelief, her hands trembling as she gripped Mark's arm. You're telling me that this thing, this creature, wants to fix the world? It's been locked away for centuries, and you want to let it loose? I'm not letting it loose, Emma said, her voice filled with a quiet determination. It's already loosed. The curse is gone. Briarwood is free. But it's not about the curse anymore. It's about balance. This creature is the key. It's the last force in the world that can restore it. The wind began to howl around them, the trees bending in the gusts, their roots stretching deeper into the earth, as though the land itself was reacting to Emma's words. The ground shuddered beneath them, a deep rumble like the very pulse of the planet, vibrating through their bones. The creature's form began to shift again, its skeletal body becoming more defined, more solid, its bones cracking as though they were awakening from an age-old slumber. And yet, it was graceful, its movements flowing with a purpose that was both ancient and deliberate. The creature's immense head bent down toward Emma, its golden eyes narrowing as if it were studying her, recognizing her, understanding that she held the key to its future. It wasn't just the creature that was awakening. The entire forest was shifting as if waking from a long, deep sleep. The trees creaked and groaned, their roots digging deeper into the earth, as though pulling the energy from the core of the world itself. Emma could feel it now, deep in her chest. The pulse of the earth, the heartbeat of Briarwood, resonating with her own. The land was alive, more alive than it had ever been before, and it was asking for help. The ancient creature was part of that life, part of the balance that had existed long before humanity had even set foot on the land. But it had been bound, kept hidden away by the curse, forced into slumber to keep the balance in check. But now that the curse had been lifted, the creature was stirring. And with it, the land was waking up, stretching, shifting, ready to reclaim its rightful place in the world. Emma stepped forward, her heart pounding, and reached out her hand toward the creature. It was a bold move, one that carried a great deal of risk, but she felt that the time for fear had passed. This was the moment she had been drawn to, the moment she had been prepared for. She had no idea how she knew it, but she could feel it deep inside her. She had to help this creature, help the land, help Briarwood restore the balance it had once known. The creature's gaze softened, its golden eyes flickering with something that Emma could only describe as recognition. It bowed its head, its enormous horns nearly brushing the ground, and as it did, the pulse in the earth grew stronger, resonating through her body like a powerful electric current. The wind died down, the air thick with a sense of expectancy. It was waiting. Without thinking, Emma placed her hand on the ground, her palm pressed flat against the earth. She could feel the pulse beneath her fingertips, the warmth of the land's heartbeat, and for a moment, the world around her seemed to fade away. There was only her hand, the earth, and the creature standing over her, its presence like a vast ocean of power. "Help me restore the world," the voice echoed in her mind, deeper now, more insistent. "Help me heal the land. Help me awaken what was lost." The words were clear now, no longer muffled by the distance between them. They were a plea, a request, a demand for Emma to act. The creature's power surged through her, filling her chest, her veins, her very soul. She could feel the land reaching up toward her, connecting with her, asking her to act as a conduit, to bridge the gap between this ancient force and the world that had long forgotten its roots. And in that moment, Emma understood. This wasn't just about Briarwood. It was about everything. The land, the forest, the creatures, the people. All of it had been disconnected, pulled apart, poisoned by greed, by fear, by the insatiable need for control. But now, the forest was asking for help to restore the balance, to remind the earth of its true nature. She closed her eyes, taking a deep breath, and when she opened them again, she could see the world differently. The trees around her glowed with a faint light, the forest alive with energy. The air felt charged, the wind carrying with it the smell of rain, of moss, of earth. She felt connected to it all, as if she were part of the very fabric of the world, woven together with the creatures, the plants, the land itself. The creature raised its head, its immense form towering over her, and its voice resonated once more, louder now, more powerful. "Do you understand?" Emma nodded slowly, her heart pounding, her breath steady. "Yes," she whispered, "I understand." And as she did, the ground beneath them began to crack once more, but this time, it wasn't a violent rupture. It was a renewal. The forest began to stir, its roots pulling free from the earth, its branches stretching toward the sky as if reaching for something far beyond the horizon. The world was awakening, shifting, changing, and in that moment, Emma knew that nothing would ever be the same again. This was the beginning of a new age, a new understanding between the earth and its inhabitants. The land was reclaiming its power, and with it, the chance for balance to be restored. The creature's massive eyes glowed brighter, its form rippling with power, and Emma felt the shift, the moment when the world itself was reborn. The air hummed with an otherworldly resonance, thick with the pulse of the earth, vibrating beneath Emma's feet. The forest had come alive around her, and the very world itself felt as though it were waking up from an ancient slumber. The creatures of Briarwood, once hidden in the shadows, now stirred, their forms flickering in the dimming light as the land seemed to respond to the awakening of the ancient heart of the forest. The trees groaned as if stretching after a long rest, their roots writhing and twisting beneath the ground, seeking something deep within the earth. The creature above Emma, towering over her with its massive skeletal form, seemed to breathe with the earth itself. Its enormous chest expanded and contracted slowly, the power of the land pulsing with every movement, like the rhythm of the planet's heartbeat. The trees bent their branches, reaching toward the great being as though they were eager to embrace it, as if they had always known it, always awaited its return. Emma could feel the connection now, the thread that bound her to this ancient force, the heartbeat of the world itself. It was no longer just about Briarwood. It was the entire planet, all of nature, every living thing connected in a vast, intricate web of life. The creature before her was not simply the guardian of Briarwood. It was the guardian of the earth itself, the embodiment of balance, of life, of the forces that govern nature. Her breath caught in her throat as the energy in the air intensified, crackling around her like static. The wind stirred, rustling through the leaves, carrying the scent of rain and earth, of something ancient and timeless. It was as if the world had been holding its breath, waiting for this moment, and now the dam had burst, the energy rushing forward with unstoppable force. "We can't stop it," Sarah whispered, her voice barely audible over the sound of the growing wind. She stood behind Emma, her face pale, her hands clenched into fists at her sides. "This is beyond us. It's too much." "It's not about stopping it," Emma said quietly, her voice calm despite the chaos unfolding around them. She could feel the pull of the creature's gaze, the weight of its power settling over her like a mantle. "It's about understanding it." Mark stepped closer, his brow furrowed in thought. "Understanding what? This creature, this force, it could destroy everything we know. It's far beyond us, Emma. We don't have the power to control it." Emma turned toward him, her eyes steady and focused. It's not about control. It's about balance. Briarwood was a protector, a shield for the heart of the forest. But it's more than that. This is the pulse of the earth. The creature is not just a guardian of Briarwood, it's the keeper of the world's natural order. It was locked away because we were too far removed from the natural order. The curse was meant to contain the power, to protect the world from what we didn't understand. But now it's time for the world to heal. The creature's massive form shuddered, its enormous limbs stretching outward like tree branches reaching for the stars. Its bones groaned, a deep, resonant sound that echoed through the forest, the trees, the very earth itself. It was as though the earth was responding to it, answering its call. The land around them began to shift, the very ground beneath them moving as if the land itself was breathing. Emma's heart pounded in her chest as she stepped closer to the creature, feeling the heat of its ancient power radiating from its form. The creature's eyes narrowed, glowing brighter now, the golden light burning with an intensity that pierced through the twilight. Its gaze fixed on her, and for a moment, Emma felt as though it was speaking to her, not with words but with a deep, unspoken understanding. It was calling her to join it, to become part of this larger force that was awakening, to be the bridge between the earth and the creatures who had forgotten their place in the world. "Help me restore the balance," the voice echoed in her mind again, louder this time, more insistent. "The world is dying. It is fractured, broken by the hands of those who do not understand. Help me bring it back to its true form." The urgency of the plea struck Emma deep within her chest, and she knew that this was her purpose. She wasn't here by accident. She wasn't here because she had been drawn to the forest out of curiosity or chance. She was here because she had been chosen, because the land had recognized her, connected with her in a way that transcended time, transcended human understanding. "I'm here," Emma whispered, her voice almost lost in the wind that howled around her. She reached her hand out toward the creature, her palm facing the earth beneath them. "I'm here to help. I will help." The creature's eyes softened, its immense body shifting as it lowered its head toward her, its enormous horns barely grazing the tops of the trees. The earth trembled again, but this time, it wasn't a violent shaking. It was a steady vibration like the rhythm of a pulse, the heartbeat of the world. The ground began to crack open, fissures spreading out from the chasm where the creature had first emerged, and in the distance, Emma could hear the sound of rushing water, rivers and streams bursting from their banks, flowing freely, as though the land were reclaiming its power, reclaiming its life. And then, as if in response to the creature's rising power, the skies darkened, thick clouds swirling overhead. The first drop of rain fell, then another and another until the heavens opened, and the rain poured down in torrents, soaking the earth, washing it clean. The air smelled of damp earth, of renewal, of something ancient and pure. The forest around them seemed to breathe, the sound of the rain mingling with the soft whisper of the wind through the trees. The creature, its massive form now nearly blending into the forest itself, rose higher still. Its skeletal limbs stretched upward, and as it did, the trees around them seemed to stretch and grow, their branches reaching toward the sky, their trunks thickening and strengthening. The forest was growing, awakening, as though it had been dormant for centuries and was now reclaiming what was always its own. Emma felt a rush of power surging through her veins, the pulse of the land flowing through her like fire. She could feel it in the soil beneath her feet, in the trees around her, in the rain that soaked her skin. It was the heartbeat of the earth, the pulse of life itself, and it was calling to her, pulling her in, urging her to act. The creature's voice echoed once more, resonating through the air, its presence filling the clearing. "This is only the beginning. The land will heal, but it must be reminded. It must be reborn." Emma nodded, the weight of the creature's words sinking deep into her soul. She had known it all along. This wasn't just about Briarwood. This was about the earth. This was about life. And the creature, this ancient guardian, was not an enemy. It was the remedy. The cure for a world that had forgotten its roots, its balance. The creature's eyes turned toward the horizon, where the storm clouds gathered, swirling like a tempest ready to burst. And as it did, the rain intensified, the wind howling as the earth around them trembled with anticipation. And then, as the creature's massive form seemed to merge with the forest itself, Emma felt a shift in the air, a deep, steadying breath that filled her lungs and her heart. It was as if the world were exhaling, letting go of the pain, the fractures, the corruption. The earth was healing, and with it, the creatures of the forest, the land, the very heart of it all, were awakening to their true purpose. And Emma, standing in the center of it all, felt a deep sense of peace, peace in knowing that the land was alive again, that the earth was reclaiming its strength, its spirit, and its balance. And in that moment, as the rain poured down around her, the world shifted. And Emma understood, the earth was not simply alive. It was awakening. The rain fell in sheets, a deluge of water that drenched the forest floor, soaking through Emma's clothes and her skin, but it didn't matter. The world around her was changing, and she could feel it, a steady pulse reverberating through the earth, through the trees, through the very air. The ground beneath her feet shifted with the force of the creature's rise, cracking open in jagged lines, as though the land itself was waking from a long, deep slumber. The forest, no, the world, was stirring, and it was no longer just about Briarwood. The creature, this ancient force, this guardian, wasn't just the heart of the forest. It was the embodiment of balance itself, the protector of the earth, and it was awakening to its full power, the power of the natural world. The wind howled, and the trees, once motionless, began to bend in unison, their branches reaching upward, stretching toward the dark, swirling clouds that seemed to gather in response to the creature's presence. The very air was electric, filled with an energy that hummed in Emma's bones. Emma closed her eyes for a moment, letting the rain wash over her, feeling the earth's pulse in her chest. It was like the beating of a heart, slow, steady, strong, and as she exhaled, she felt her own heartbeat align with it. The connection was undeniable now, inescapable. She was part of the forest, part of the land, part of something older, something beyond comprehension. "We are one," the creature's voice echoed in her mind, not in words, but in feelings, in a deep, resonant knowing. "The land is alive. It has always been alive. And it is waiting for us to remember." The words stirred something deep within Emma, something that she hadn't realized was there until now. It wasn't just the forest that was alive, it was the earth. It was everything, every stone, every leaf, every breath of wind. The whole world was connected, and it was waiting for humanity to remember its place within that connection. It was waiting for them to reconnect with the balance that had existed before greed, before fear, before they had poisoned the land and fractured the spirit of the world. And now it was too late for regrets. Now it was time for the world to heal. As the creature raised its enormous head to the heavens, the earth beneath Emma's feet began to shift in earnest, the ground quaking as the immense force of nature surged upward, pushing through the soil and the roots, the rocks and the rivers. The trees groaned and creaked as they reached higher into the sky, their trunks expanding and thickening, their branches weaving together to form a canopy of green that spread across the forest like a living blanket, stretching toward the horizon. The storm above them grew more intense, the clouds swirling and darkening, but the rain, it was no longer cold. It was warm, soothing, the kind of rain that washed away the sins of the past and allowed new life to take root. The drops were like tiny threads of light, each one a tiny vessel of energy, filling the earth with life, with energy, with a new beginning. Emma opened her eyes and looked up at the massive creature before her, its skeletal form now fully emerged from the earth, its body pulsating with a golden glow that rippled through its bones, through the air, through the entire forest. It was like watching the heartbeat of the world itself, the rhythm of life pulsing in time with the winds, the rain, the growth of the trees, the stretching of the land. It was a rebirth, and Emma understood, as if the knowledge had been implanted into her soul, that this was not just a one-time event. This was the beginning of a new age. An age where humanity and nature would have to learn to live together again. But the road ahead would not be easy. The earth had been scarred, the balance had been broken, and now the world needed to heal. The creature, the guardian of the land, was not here to force the world into submission. It was here to guide it, to restore the natural order, to remind humanity of its place in the grand web of life. Emma took a deep breath, feeling the weight of her responsibility. She wasn't just a spectator in this process. She was part of it. She was part of the earth, part of the creature, part of the balance that had been fractured, and it was her role, her calling, to help heal it, to help bring the world back into harmony. Behind her, Sarah and Mark stood motionless, their eyes wide, their faces pale with a mix of awe and fear. They could feel it too, the weight of what was happening, the enormity of the change that was unfolding before them. They could hear the whispers in the wind, feel the energy in the air, feel the connection to the earth that was awakening. But there was still a part of them, still a part of all of them, that feared what the creature represented. It was so powerful, so immense, that it was hard to see beyond the raw, primal energy of its presence. But Emma could see. She could feel it now. The creature wasn't a threat. It wasn't here to destroy. It was here to restore. To remind them all that life was not something to be controlled. It was something to be nurtured, something to be respected. It was time for humanity to stop taking from the earth and start giving. "Do you understand?" Emma said softly, her voice carrying over the wind, her words directed at Sarah and Mark. "It's not a force of destruction. It's a force of renewal. It's time for us to remember our place in this world, to learn how to live with it, not against it. Sarah and Mark exchanged a look, their faces etched with uncertainty. But as the creature's golden eyes glowed brighter, as the trees around them continued to grow and stretch, as the rain fell harder, they began to understand. They didn't have to accept it all in an instant, but they could see the truth. They could feel it in the air, in the earth beneath their feet, in the pulse that vibrated through their bones. The creature's voice echoed again, its words carrying on the wind, a message to all who would listen, to all who were willing to listen. The world is in your hands. You are part of the earth, part of the life that sustains it. You are not separate. You are connected. Do not forget this truth. You are part of the web of life. You are its guardians just as I am. Together we will restore the balance. Together we will heal the world. As the creature's voice faded, Emma felt the shift in the air, the land, the world. It wasn't just about Briarwood anymore. It was about everything. The earth was alive, and it was awakening. And so Emma stood, the rain pouring down on her, the storm swirling above them, the winds carrying the heartbeat of the earth through her veins. She was not alone. None of them were. The world was waking up, and they were all a part of it. They had a choice now, a choice to help the world heal, to restore the balance that had been broken. And with that choice came a responsibility to protect, to nurture, to remember. The world was awakening, and together they would see it reborn. The rain continued to fall in heavy sheets, each drop a thread of life, weaving the earth back into its natural rhythm. The forest around Emma, once a place of fear and uncertainty, had transformed into a living, breathing entity, a testament to the ancient power that still pulsed beneath the ground. The creature, the guardian, loomed before her, its massive form towering over the forest, its skeletal body flickering with a golden glow that seemed to shimmer with the heartbeat of the earth itself. Every movement, every breath it took sent ripples through the air, through the trees, through the land. The wind howled, but it was not the chaotic, fearsome wind they had heard before. This was a cleansing wind, a force of nature that carried with it the power of rebirth. It swept through the trees, rustling the leaves, shaking loose the old and dead, making room for the new. The forest was alive in a way that was both awe-inspiring and humbling, a reminder that life was cyclical, ever-changing, always growing, always becoming. Emma stood still in the midst of the storm, her heart pounding with the weight of everything she had learned in the past few moments. She could feel the forest's pulse in her chest, its rhythm syncing with her own. She could feel the world waking up around her, feel the ground beneath her feet breathing in time with her breath. It was as though she had become part of the very fabric of the land, woven into the vast web of life that stretched across the earth. The creature's golden eyes glimmered as they locked onto hers, its massive head bowing slightly, as though acknowledging her understanding. Its presence was overwhelming, its power both humbling and terrifying. And yet, Emma knew that this was not a force to be feared. It was a force to be embraced, a force that had always existed even before humanity had stepped foot on this land. It was the guardian of the earth, the embodiment of balance, and now it was here to restore that balance, to remind humanity of the natural order that had been lost. "You feel it, don't you?" Emma whispered, her voice trembling as she looked at Sarah and Mark, who stood behind her, still caught in the storm of their own disbelief. "The land, it's waking up. The world is alive again." Sarah's eyes were wide, her mouth slightly open in awe and fear. She had seen the transformation in the forest, the trees that were stretching toward the sky, the earth that was shaking beneath their feet. But it was hard for her to fully comprehend the enormity of what was happening. The world was changing, and it was beyond anything she had ever imagined. I don't know what to say, Emma. This is too much. This creature, it's not just a force, it's the heart of the earth." Mark stepped forward, his brow furrowed in deep thought. "You're right. We are connected to this land. It's not just Briarwood. This is the world. It's all connected. But we've broken it, haven't we? We've poisoned the land, we've cut down the trees, we've taken what wasn't ours to take. How can we help fix it?" Emma felt a pang of sorrow at the truth of Mark's words. The scars that humanity had left on the land were deep, and it would take more than just a moment to undo the damage. But there was hope. Hope in the creature's rise, hope in the storm that raged above them, hope in the very earth beneath their feet. The world was not beyond saving. It was waiting for humanity to wake up, to remember its place in the grand design. "It's not about fixing everything all at once," Emma said softly, her voice carrying in the wind. "It's about learning. It's about understanding that we are not separate from the earth. We are the earth. We need to restore the balance, to live in harmony with the land, with the creatures, with the forest. It's about healing. The words settled heavily in the air, and for a moment, everything was still. The storm above them seemed to pause, the wind falling to a whisper as if the forest itself was listening. Then the creature's eyes flickered again, a golden spark of recognition passing between them. The pulse of the earth grew stronger, and Emma knew in that moment that it wasn't just her that the creature had chosen. It was all of them. All of humanity. They were all part of this, part of the Earth's journey to healing. The creature's voice boomed in her mind, deeper and more resonant than before, as though it were speaking directly to the soul of the Earth, to the very heart of the world. You are the stewards of the Earth. You have forgotten your place, but it is not too late. The world has been fractured, but you can heal it. You have the power to restore balance. You are the children of this land, and together, you will help it awaken once more. The words echoed through Emma's chest, through her bones, through the very core of her being. It was a responsibility, yes, but it was also a gift. A chance to be part of something greater than herself, greater than any of them. The world had not given up on humanity. The earth was not beyond saving. It was waiting. The creature's massive form seemed to ripple with power, and Emma could feel the weight of its energy filling the air. It was not a destructive force. It was a force of creation, of life, of renewal. The rain, once cold and harsh, now felt warm on her skin, the water feeding the earth, nourishing it. The land was coming alive, and the creatures, every creature, were stirring. The plants, the animals, the insects, everything was part of the grand design, and together they would bring the world back into balance. Emma looked at Sarah and Mark, her eyes filled with a quiet determination. "It's time," she said softly. "We can't wait any longer. We have to help. We have to be part of this change." Sarah's gaze softened, and for the first time, she seemed to understand. "You're right," she said, her voice steadying. "We're part of this. We've always been part of it. But we've forgotten what it means to live with the earth, to live with the land." Mark nodded, his eyes meeting Emma's. "We've taken so much. It's time to give back. We've got to start somewhere. Together." Emma felt the weight of their words settle in the air, and for the first time, she knew that they were all on the same path. This was not the end. It was the beginning of a journey of healing, of learning, and of restoring the balance that had been lost. Together they would help the world wake up. Together they would rebuild what had been broken. The creature's form began to shimmer, its immense shape folding into the forest around them, merging with the trees, the earth, the sky. It was becoming one with the land, just as they had to become one with it. Emma could feel the connection deep in her soul, a bond that stretched across time and space, from the dawn of creation to the present moment. The creature was not just the guardian of the forest, it was the guardian of the earth itself. And so, as the rain continued to fall, the earth continued to breathe, and the forest stretched toward the heavens, Emma felt a deep, overwhelming sense of peace. The world was alive. It was waking up, and they were part of it. The journey ahead would not be easy, but it would be worth it. Together they would restore the balance. The rain intensified, yet there was an undeniable warmth to it now. The droplets that fell from the heavens were no longer cold and harsh, but nourishing, each one a vessel of life, filling the earth, feeding the roots of the trees, soaking into the soil like an ancient promise. The forest around Emma seemed to breathe with renewed vigor, its pulse syncing with her own, as if they were all intertwined, one living, breathing entity, bound by the ancient forces of nature. She could feel the power of the land coursing through her, filling her veins, the heartbeat of the earth thudding in her chest, in her bones. This was no longer the forest of decay, of fear. The darkness that had once shrouded Briarwood had been swept away, replaced by an overwhelming sense of awakening. It was a slow, gradual unfolding of life, like the first rays of dawn breaking through the night, illuminating a world that had been hidden for too long. And Emma, at the center of it all, understood this was only the beginning. She looked to her side, meeting Sarah's gaze. Her friend, once so uncertain, now seemed to radiate an understanding, a connection to the world that had been reawakened around them. There was no longer fear in Sarah's eyes, only acceptance. Sarah's face was streaked with rain, but her lips were set in a firm line, her posture strong. She had seen the truth now, and she was ready to take the next step. Mark, standing just behind Emma, had his eyes closed, his hand resting gently on a nearby tree. His face was soft, his features relaxed, as though he were listening to something beyond the wind, the rain, the storm. He too had felt it, the deep, ancient connection between humanity and the earth. There was a quiet understanding between them now. They were part of this, part of the earth's healing, part of the restoration that was unfolding before them. The creature, once an overwhelming presence, had now melted into the land, its form no longer a separate being but a part of the forest itself. It had become one with the earth, the trees, the very soil, and as it did, Emma felt a shift, a calming force that moved through her, settling her mind and spirit. The land was no longer just a backdrop to their lives. It was alive. It was connected. It was the source of everything, and they had to learn how to walk in harmony with it. The pulse of the earth quickened as Emma took a step forward, her hands still resting lightly on the ground. Her heart raced, her mind filled with images of the world as it had once been, before the imbalance, before the corruption. A world of lush forests, of thriving ecosystems, of creatures living in harmony with the land. She could almost see it now, through the fog of time, an earth where the trees whispered their secrets to the wind, where the rivers sang their songs to the ocean, where every creature, no matter how small, was a part of the grand design. But those days were long gone, shattered by the greed of humankind, by the insatiable desire for control over the land. The scars left on the earth were deep, the wounds so vast that it seemed impossible to heal them. Yet, standing here in the heart of Briarwood, Emma realized that it wasn't impossible. Not if they worked together. Not if they learned to listen to the earth again. The storm above them raged on, but Emma no longer felt fear in its fury. She felt connection. The rain washed over her skin, the wind whispered in her ears, and the trees swayed around her as if in rhythm with the heart of the world. And in that moment she understood, this was the path. This was their purpose. "We have to begin," Emma said quietly, her voice breaking the stillness, but it wasn't just a statement. It was a call to action. They had all felt it. The land was alive, the earth was healing, and they were part of it. They had to act. The world won't heal itself. It's waiting for us to remember, to restore what we've taken, to make things right. Sarah's eyes were filled with determination, her lips pressed together in a tight line. But where do we start? We've spent so long destroying it. How do we undo all the damage we've done? Mark looked up, his hands still resting against the bark of the ancient tree, his eyes distant, as though listening to something just beyond the veil of perception. It starts with understanding. It starts with listening. He glanced at Emma, his gaze steady. The earth speaks to us. We just have to listen. Emma nodded, her heart swelling with both the weight and the hope of what lay ahead. Exactly. We've been so consumed by what we want that we've stopped paying attention to what the earth needs. We've taken more than we've given. Now we need to give back. We need to learn how to live with the earth, not against it. The wind picked up again, this time carrying with it a faint, melodic hum that seemed to reverberate through the trees. It was a song, soft, almost imperceptible at first, but as Emma focused, she could hear it more clearly, like the song of an ancient being, a song that had been lost to time, but was now returning. The creature, the guardian of the forest, had not just been a physical entity. It was the voice of the earth itself, and now that voice was speaking again, guiding them, teaching them. Emma closed her eyes, allowing the song to fill her. She felt the pulse of the earth, felt the deep vibrations in the soil beneath her, and she knew what she had to do. It wasn't about controlling the land. It wasn't about conquering it. It was about working with it, about nurturing it. The balance had been broken, but it could be restored. The earth had not given up on them yet. It was waiting for them to remember, waiting for them to act. "I think," Emma said, her voice soft but steady, "that we need to start by healing the wounds we've caused. One step at a time. We need to listen to the land. The creatures, the trees, the rivers, they all have something to tell us. If we can hear it, if we can understand it, we can begin to heal." Sarah stepped forward, her hands reaching out toward the trees, her fingers brushing the bark. "We've taken so much," she whispered. "And now we need to give." Mark stepped beside her, his gaze focused on the distant horizon, where the storm clouds were beginning to dissipate, the first rays of sunlight piercing through the gray. "We've been blinded by our own greed. It's time to see the world for what it really is. Time to see it as part of us." The forest around them seemed to respond. The trees creaked and groaned, but not in a painful way, in a way that was both ancient and welcoming. The earth trembled beneath their feet, but it wasn't in fear. It was in anticipation. The world was waking up. And now the work of restoration would begin. Emma turned to the others, her heart filled with a quiet, resolute certainty. "We don't have all the answers yet, but we're learning. We'll learn how to live in harmony with the earth. We'll restore what's been broken." And as the rain softened to a gentle mist, as the wind settled into a calm breeze, Emma felt a deep peace settle over her. They had a long journey ahead, but they weren't alone. They were part of something much larger than themselves, part of the very earth that was now awakening, part of a restoration that would take time, patience, and understanding. But they would walk this path together. And with each step they would remember,